The old wisdom claims that desperation is the mother of invention, that when you're drowning, you'll grasp at any hand that reaches down. The fairy tales promise that our darkest moments are just preludes to rescue, that someone will swoop in when we need them most. But here's the harsh reality they don't tell you. Sometimes the hand you grab belongs to the very person who can destroy what's left of you. And sometimes, in your most humiliating moment, when you're begging a stranger for help you can't afford, you accidentally text the one person in the entire kingdom who has the power to take everything you have left. This is a story about a widow who learned that survival isn't noble, it's just a series of increasingly desperate compromises. And it's about a king who learned that absolute power means absolutely nothing when the one person you want doesn't want you back. But mostly, it's about a text message sent to the wrong number at 2:47 a.m. and how a single mistake can unravel two lives that were barely holding together in the first place. Chapter 1. The Unraveling. The baby's crying had a quality to it now that Raina had never heard before, a thin, reedy desperation that seemed to scrape directly against her spine. 3 days. Her daughter had been crying for 3 days. The kind of crying that came from a belly that had been empty too long. From a body too small to understand why the milk wouldn't come anymore. Raina sat on the floor of the apartment. Calling it an apartment was generous. It was a converted storage room in the Omega housing district, the kind of place where the walls were so thin you could hear your neighbor's heartbeats, and stared at her phone. The screen was cracked across the middle. A spiderweb fracture she'd gotten 2 months ago when Jakob had. No. She wouldn't think about Jakob. Jakob was dead. Jakob had been dead for 4 months, which meant she'd been alone for 4 months, which meant she'd been failing for 4 months. The mathematics of failure were simple in the shifter kingdom of Valderan. 1 deceased alpha mate plus 1 Omega widow plus 1 infant daughter equaled a problem that society had a very efficient solution for. And that solution was currently being spelled out in the letter she'd received that morning, the one that sat on the kitchen counter like a coiled snake. Notice of household evaluation. Your continued residence in pack housing is under review. Inspection scheduled for. She didn't need to read the rest. She knew what it meant. An Omega widow with no pack ties, no family support, and a baby she couldn't feed? They'd take Lila. They'd say it was for the child's welfare. They'd place her with a suitable family, probably some wealthy alpha couple who wanted a baby, but couldn't be bothered with the inconvenience of pregnancy, and Raina would become one of those cautionary tales other Omegas whispered about in the communal kitchens. Did you hear about the Garrick widow? Lost her baby to the state. Last I heard, she'd been reassigned to the textile factories. Died of lung fever within a year. Lila's crying intensified. That awful, weak sound that meant she was running out of energy to even protest her hunger. Raina's breasts ached with the phantom memory of milk that had dried up 6 weeks ago. Stress, the clinic doctor had said, as if naming the problem solved it. They'd given her formula vouchers, 2 weeks' worth. Those had run out 11 days ago. She'd tried everything. She'd gone to the Omega welfare office 3 times. The first time, they'd told her there was a waiting list for emergency provisions. The second time, they'd suggested she seek employment, as if anyone would hire an Omega widow with an infant, as if she could leave Lila alone for the 10-hour factory shifts. The third time, the clerk had looked at her with that particular expression of exhausted pity that was somehow worse than contempt, and said, "Maybe it's time to consider what's best for the child." That was yesterday. Today, Raina had $14 in her account, no food in the apartment except half a can of beans, and a baby who was starving. She picked up her phone with shaking hands. There was one option left. One person who might help, though asking would cost her the last shred of pride she had left. Mira, her former sister-in-law, Jakob's brother's mate. They'd been close once, before Jakob died, before Raina became a reminder of mortality that made the whole pack uncomfortable. Mira had pulled away after the funeral they all had, but maybe, if Raina explained, if she begged. She pulled up Mira's contact and started typing. Her hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to form coherent words. I know I have no right to ask. I know I haven't been part of the pack since Jakob died, but Lila hasn't eaten in 2 days. The formula vouchers ran out and welfare says there's a waiting list and I just need enough to get through until my next assistance check. Just one canister. I'll pay you back, I promise I'll find a way. Please, Mira. She's so small. She's just a baby. Please. She read it back twice, shame burning through her chest like acid. This was what she'd become, begging, groveling. But Lila's crying scratched at her ears and she wouldn't let her baby suffer because of pride. She hit send. Then she sat there on the floor, phone clutched in both hands, staring at the screen. The message showed as delivered. 1 check mark. Then 2. Then the awful, loaded word. Read. She waited. 1 minute. 2. 5. The response came in the form of 3 dots that appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, I'm sorry, Raina. Derek says we can't get involved. The Pack Council has rules about supporting severed members. You understand? Raina's vision blurred. She understood. Of course she understood. She'd stopped being Pack the moment Jacob's heart stopped beating, and Omega's value was tied to her alpha, and without Jakob, she was nothing. A liability. A reminder that bad things happened even to good Pack members. She set the phone down carefully, afraid that if she held it any longer, she'd throw it against the wall, and she couldn't afford to replace it. She couldn't afford anything. Lila's crying had quieted to a whimper. That was worse. That meant she was giving up. I'm so sorry, baby, Raina whispered into the dark apartment. I'm so sorry, Mama can't. Her phone buzzed. Hope lurched in her chest. Maybe Mira had changed her mind. Maybe. But the name on the screen made her blood freeze. Unknown number. She opened it with fumbling fingers. The message was short. Is this a joke? Raina stared at it, confused. Exhaustion making it hard to process. What? She hadn't texted any unknown numbers. She'd only texted Mira. She was sure of it. She'd pulled up Mira's contact directly from. Her stomach dropped. No. No, 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 no. With dawning horror, she pulled up her recent messages. There it was. The text she'd sent. The desperate, humiliating, soul-bearing text about her starving baby. Sent to unknown number. Not Mira. Not Mira at all. She must have when she'd dropped the phone last week. When the screen cracked, it must have scrambled her contacts somehow, reassigned numbers, and she'd been so tired, so desperate, she hadn't double-checked, and now some complete stranger had received a message about her failing as a mother, about her baby starving, about. Her phone buzzed again. I ask if this is a joke. Answer me. The tone was sharp, commanding, the kind of voice that expected obedience. Raina's fingers moved on autopilot, humiliation scorching through her. I'm so sorry. Wrong number. Please delete the message. She should have left it there. Should have blocked the number and buried her face in her hands and tried to forget this had happened. But her phone buzzed a 3rd time before she could do any of that. Your baby hasn't eaten in 2 days? Something in those words, the directness of them, the lack of pity or judgment. Just a flat question demanding a straight answer made her fingers move before her brain could stop them. Yes. A longer pause this time. She watched the dots appear and disappear 3 times. When the response came, it wasn't what she expected. What's your address? Chapter 2. The King at the Door. Raina stared at the message for a full 30 seconds. Her exhausted brain struggling to process what she was reading. What's your address? This had to be a trap. Or a scam. Or some sick person who got off on exploiting desperate Omegas. She'd heard the stories predators who trolled welfare offices and housing districts, looking for vulnerable women they could manipulate. Women who would do anything for help. Her phone buzzed again. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to bring formula. What's your address? The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they sent ice down her spine. Because nobody in Valderan helped an Omega widow out of pure kindness. Everything had a price. Everything was a transaction. And she'd already lost so much that the thought of what else she might have to pay made her stomach turn. But Lila whimpered again from the bassinet in the corner, that awful weak sound, and Raina's hands were typing before her mind could stop them. Omega District, Building Saven. Unit 3. F. The moment she hit send, regret crashed over her. What had she done? She'd just given her address to a complete stranger. A stranger she'd accidentally texted her most humiliating moment to. A stranger who now knew she was alone, desperate, and had something he could leverage. 3 dots appeared immediately. 20 minutes. That was all. No explanation, no demands, just a timestamp on her fate. Raina forced herself to stand, her legs shaking from more than just exhaustion. She looked around the apartment with the eyes of someone who was about to be judged. What would this stranger see? The water stain on the ceiling that maintenance had ignored for 3 months. The broken heater that meant she had to keep Lila bundled in every blanket they owned. The empty refrigerator that hummed pointlessly in the corner. The single plate in the sink that she'd used for the beans she'd split between yesterday and today. Evidence. All of it evidence that she was failing. She should clean up. Make it look like she had things under control. But what was the point? You couldn't hide poverty. It had a smell desperation mixed with cheap soap and the particular staleness of an apartment that never got warm enough. It had a sound, the silence of empty cupboards and disconnected cable. It had a weight that pressed down on everything, until even the air felt thin. Instead, she went to Lila's bassinet and picked up her daughter. The baby had stopped crying entirely now, just lay there with glassy eyes, too weak to protest anymore. Raina held her against her chest, feeling the 2 prominent ribs, the way her daughter's body felt lighter than it should, and something cracked open in her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. "I'm so sorry, baby. Mama's trying. I promise I'm trying." Lila didn't respond, couldn't respond, just breathed in that shallow, rapid way that meant her little body was working too hard to survive on nothing. Raina was still standing there, swaying slightly with her daughter, when the knock came. It wasn't a soft knock. It was authoritative. 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through the entire building. Her heart hammered as she moved to the door. She should look through the peephole first. Should ask who it was. Should do any of the things a smart woman would do when a stranger was at her door at 3 in the morning. She opened it anyway. The man standing in her hallway was not what she expected. First, he was massive. Not just tall, though he was easily 6'4", but broad. The kind of build that spoke of power, of violence barely contained beneath expensive clothes. He wore all black wool coat that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent, black sweater, black pants. His dark hair was slightly too long, falling across a face that was all sharp angles and cold eyes. Alpha. The pheromone signature hit her immediately, so strong it nearly made her knees buckle. Not just any alpha. This was dominance that made the air feel thick, made her omega instincts scream at her to either submit or run. Second, he was carrying bags. Multiple bags from an all-night pharmacy, the kind that stayed open in the wealthy districts where people paid premium prices for convenience. Third, he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Not pity, not disgust. Something else entirely. Something that made her skin prickle with awareness. "You're the Omega who texted me," he said. Not a question. A statement delivered in a voice that matched his bearing, deep, controlled, used to being obeyed. Raina's throat felt like sandpaper. "Ah yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. My phone. How old?" He nodded at Lila, cutting off her rambling apology. 4 months. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Then he was moving past her into the apartment, not asking permission, just entering her space like he owned it. Like he owned everything. Raina's instincts screamed at her danger, predator, threat, but her body was too exhausted to do anything but step back and let him in. He set the bags on her kitchen counter, the only counter, barely 3 feet long, and started unpacking. Formula. Multiple canisters of it. The expensive kind, the kind that came in containers with specialized mixing instructions and cost $40 each. Bottles, a sterilizer, diapers, baby wipes, jars of pureed food for when she was older. Raina stood frozen, Lila still clutched to her chest, watching this strange alpha fill her empty apartment with things she couldn't afford, things she'd been begging for, things that represented survival. "You need to feed her now," he said, not looking at her as he opened one of the formula canisters. "Where are your bottles?" I don't have any clean ones. I've been washing the one I have, but..." He pulled a new bottle from one of the bags, tore it from the packaging with efficient movements, and started measuring formula into it. His hands were large, scarred across the knuckles, but they moved with surprising precision. "Boiled water?" he asked. "In the kettle. It should still be warm." He found it, tested the temperature against his wrist, the way the hospital nurses had shown her, and mixed the formula with practiced ease. The sight of this massive, dangerous-looking alpha preparing a bottle in her dingy kitchen was so surreal that Raina wondered briefly if she'd fallen asleep on the floor and this was a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and starvation. Then he turned and held out the bottle. "Feed her." Raina moved on autopilot, taking the bottle with shaking hands and bringing it to Lila's lips. Her daughter latched on immediately, sucking with desperate hunger, and the sound of it, that eager, greedy sound of a baby finally getting what she needed, broke something loose in Raina's chest. She sank into the single chair at her kitchen table, tears streaming down her face as she watched Lila eat. She couldn't stop them, couldn't control the sobs that shook her shoulders as relief and shame and exhaustion all crashed over her at once. The stranger said nothing, just stood there in her kitchen, watching her fall apart with that same unreadable expression. When Lila had drained half the bottle and her eyes were starting to droop with the kind of exhaustion that came after crisis had passed, Raina finally found her voice. "Thank you," she whispered. I can't thank you. When did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. Yesterday. I had some beans." His expression darkened. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and typed something. Less than a minute later, her own phone buzzed. She couldn't check it with Lila in her arms, but he told her anyway. "I sent money to your account. Enough for a month's worth of groceries. You need to eat if you're going to take care of her." Raina's head snapped up. I can't accept that. I don't even know who you are." "My name is Darius Kale." The world tilted. Darius Kale. The Darius Kale, Alpha King of Valdarin, ruler of the 7 territories, the man whose face was on every government building, whose word was literally law, whose power was absolute. She'd accidentally texted the king begging for baby formula. "Oh God," she breathed. "Oh God, I'm so sorry, Your Majesty, I didn't know. I would never have." "Stop." The command in his voice cut through her panic like a blade. "You didn't know. It doesn't matter." But it did matter. It mattered because she'd bothered the king with her problems. It mattered because she was sitting in her poverty-stricken apartment, wearing clothes she'd been wearing for 3 days while the most powerful alpha in the kingdom stood in her kitchen. It mattered because everything about this situation was wrong. "Why are you here?" The question came out before she could stop it. "You're the king. You could have sent anyone. Why did you come yourself?" For the first time, something flickered in those cold eyes. Something that might have been pain, or anger, or something else she couldn't name. "Because I know what it's like," he said quietly. "To watch someone you love starve while everyone else looks away." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning she didn't understand. Before she could respond, before she could ask what he meant, he was moving toward the door. "Wait," she called out. "I need to pay you back. I can't take charity. Tell me what you want." He stopped at the threshold and turned back to look at her. Really look at her, with an intensity that made her feel naked despite being fully clothed. "What's your name?" he asked. Raina Garrick. Raina." He said it like he was testing the weight of it. "I don't want anything from you. Not tonight." The way he said tonight with just enough emphasis to suggest there might be other nights, other times when he would want something sent a chill down her spine. "But you'll text me tomorrow. Let me know how she's doing. That's the price." And then he was gone. The door closing behind him with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Raina sat there in her chair, Lila sleeping against her chest, staring at the bags of formula and supplies on her counter. At the evidence that this had really happened, that the king had been in her apartment, had fed her baby, had given her money she desperately needed. She should have been relieved. Grateful. Instead, she felt like she'd just made a deal with the devil, and she wouldn't know the true cost until it was far too late to back out. Her phone buzzed. She managed to shift Lila enough to check it. A message from the same unknown number, except now she knew exactly who it belonged to. "Save this number. And Raina, I meant what I said. Text me tomorrow. She stared at the message for a long time. Then, because she was too tired and too grateful and too scared to do anything else, she saved the contact. Under the name, The King Who Came. She didn't know it yet. But that moment, that decision to save his number, instead of deleting it, to acknowledge the connection he'd forged by showing up in her darkest hour, would change everything. Because Darius Kale, Alpha King of Valderin, hadn't come to her apartment out of simple kindness. He'd come because something in her desperate text message had reached through all his carefully constructed walls and reminded him of a promise he'd made long ago. A promise he'd failed to keep. And now, whether she wanted it or not, Rhaena Garrick had become his chance at redemption. Chapter 3. The Daily Texts. Rhaena woke to sunlight filtering through the threadbare curtains and the disorienting realization that Lila wasn't crying. Panic shot through her before her sleep-fogged brain caught up. She lurched upright from where she'd fallen asleep in the chair, still holding Lila, who was nestled peacefully against her chest, and checked her daughter's breathing. Steady. Strong. The baby's cheeks had more color than they'd had in days, and when Lila stirred at the movement, she didn't immediately start that awful, hungry wailing. She was okay. They were okay. The bags on the counter proved last night hadn't been a fever dream. Formula canisters lined up like soldiers, diapers stacked neatly, and her phone, lying face up on the table, showed a bank notification that made her throat tight. Deposit, $1,500. $1,500. More money than she'd seen in one place since Jacob died. Enough for food, for the overdue electric bill, for the inspection fee the housing authority would charge when they came to evaluate whether she was fit to keep her daughter. All from a king who'd shown up at her door at 3 a.m. because she'd texted him by mistake. Her phone buzzed, and her heart jumped before she even looked at it. The King Who Came. How is she? 3 words. Simple, direct. But they carried an expectation that made Rhaena's fingers hover over the keyboard. He'd said the price was a text, letting him know Lila was okay. That seemed simple enough, harmless. So why did it feel like stepping onto a path she couldn't see the end of? She looked down at Lila, who was starting to wake up, making the little grunting sounds that meant she'd want another bottle soon. A bottle they now had, formula they could afford. Because of him, Rhaena typed. She ate 3 ounces last night and slept for 5 hours straight. I've never seen her sleep that long. Thank you. She hit send before she could overthink it. The response came within seconds, like he'd been waiting. Good. Feed her every 3 to 4 hours. The formula instructions are on the canister, but if you have questions, ask me. Something about that, the casual assumption that she could just ask the king questions about baby formula, was so absurd that she almost laughed. Almost. If she started laughing, she might start crying again, and she'd done enough of that last night. I will. Thank you again for everything. She thought that would be the end of it. Transaction complete. Debt acknowledged. They could both move on with their lives, her to survival, him to whatever kings did with their days. But another message came through. Have you eaten yet? Rhaena stared at the question. Had she eaten? She'd been awake for maybe 10 minutes. Lila needed to be changed and fed. The apartment needed to be cleaned before the inspection. She had to figure out how to stretch that $1,500 as far as possible. Eating seemed low on the priority list. Not yet. I will soon. Now, Rhaena. You need to eat now. You can't take care of her if you collapse. The use of her name did something strange to her chest, and the commanding tone, that alpha voice that expected obedience, should have made her bristle, should have reminded her that she'd spent too many years being told what to do by people who claimed to know better. Instead, it made her feel seen. Like someone was actually paying attention to whether she survived this, not just her baby. She stood up carefully, Lila still drowsy in her arms, and went to the kitchen. The half can of beans was still there. She could heat those up. That would count as eating. Her phone buzzed again before she could open the can. I'm having food delivered. Should be there in 30 minutes. Real food, you'll eat it. Rhaena's fingers flew across the keyboard. You don't need to do that. You already gave me money. I can buy my own food. You won't. You'll spend it on her and tell yourself you'll eat later. I know how this works. The accuracy of that statement hit too close to home. Because yes, she'd already been mentally calculating how to make the 1,500 last formula first, then diapers, then the bills, then maybe, if there was anything left. Fine, she typed back, something like defiance making her add, but I'm paying you back. We'll discuss terms later. That phrase terms later should have worried her, should have sent up every red flag. But Lila was starting to fuss, needing a change and another bottle, and Raina let herself be pulled into the morning routine that felt almost normal now that she had supplies. The food arrived exactly 30 minutes later. Not cheap takeout or fast food, but real meals from one of the upscale restaurants in the Alpha District. Protein-rich soup, fresh bread, roasted vegetables, even a slice of cake that looked too beautiful to eat. The delivery driver, a young beta who kept his eyes carefully averted, handed her the bags, along with a note written in sharp, precise handwriting. Eat all of it, I'll know if you don't. Raina's first instinct was to laugh at the absurdity. How would he know? But as she unpacked the food, still warm and fragrant in a way that made her stomach clench with hunger she'd been ignoring for weeks, she found her phone typing without conscious thought. How exactly will you know if I eat? The response was immediate. Because you'll tell me. Why would I tell you? Because I asked. And because you're not a liar, Raina Garrick. She stared at that message for a long moment. He was right. She wasn't a liar. Even when lying would have been easier, would have saved her from judgment or pity, she'd always been compulsively honest. It was one of the things Jakob had loved about her, one of the things his pack had found inconvenient after he died. She ate the soup first, then the bread, then forced herself through half the vegetables before her shrunken stomach protested. The cake she wrapped carefully and put in the refrigerator that would be for later, or maybe never. It felt too precious to waste on just herself. When she was done, she texted him, I ate the soup, the bread, and some vegetables. I couldn't finish everything. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Your stomach needs time to adjust. Eat small amounts every few hours. There's more coming for dinner. You're sending more food? Every day until you don't look like you're going to collapse. Raina set her phone down and pressed her hands against her face. This was too much help from someone she didn't know, someone who had no reason to care whether she lived or died. Kings didn't do this, didn't personally ensure that struggling Omegas got fed, didn't text throughout the day to check on babies they'd never met. So why was he? That question haunted her through the afternoon as she cleaned the apartment. As she fed Lila again and watched her daughter actually have energy to look around with curious eyes, as she paid the overdue electric bill and felt the knot of anxiety in her chest loosen just slightly. By evening, another meal arrived. By nightfall, another text. How many times did she eat today? Raina answered. 5 times, 4 ounces each. She's sleeping now. And you? How many times did you eat? 3. The food you sent was enough for 2 meals. Good. Same time tomorrow. This continued for 3 days. Every morning, a text. How is she? Every afternoon, food delivered. Every evening, questions about Lila's feeding schedule, her sleep patterns, whether Raina had noticed any concerns. And slowly, subtly, the questions became more personal. What did you do before? Meaning before she became a widow, before her life collapsed. I was a transcriptionist, she answered honestly. I worked from home, typing up medical records and legal documents. I was good at it. Why did you stop? Because grief makes you stupid. I missed deadlines. Made mistakes. They let me go. You're not stupid. Those 3 words, delivered with absolute certainty from someone who barely knew her, shouldn't have mattered. But they did. On the 4th day, the housing inspector came. A middle-aged beta woman with kind eyes and a clipboard that might as well have been a judge's gavel. Raina showed her the apartment, heart pounding as the woman noted the water stain, the broken heater, the general shabbiness of the space. But then the inspector opened the refrigerator full of food now, and checked the cupboard stocked with formula and baby supplies and looked at Lila, who was alert and clean and clearly well fed. You've made improvements, the inspector said carefully. Last report said you were struggling with basic provisions. Things got better, Raina said, which was technically true. Family support? Something like that. The inspector made notes, checked a few more boxes, and finally nodded. I'll recommend continued housing approval. You'll have another check-in in 3 months. Try to get that heater fixed if you can." When she left, Raina sat down hard on the floor and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for months. They weren't taking Lila. She'd passed. They were safe. She texted him. "The inspection passed. We can stay." His response came with unusual quickness. "I know. I got the report an hour ago." Raina's blood went cold. "You got the report? How did you?" "I'm the king, Raina. I get reports on everything." "You were tracking my housing inspection?" A longer pause this time. Then, yes, the honesty of it should have scared her. Should have felt like surveillance, like control, like all the things she'd hated about being packless and powerless in a system designed to crush people like her. Instead, it felt like someone was standing between her and the abyss, like someone was making sure she didn't fall. "Why?" she typed. "Why are you doing this?" The response took almost 10 minutes. She watched the dots appear and disappear 3 times. Whatever he was writing, he kept deleting and rewriting. Finally, "Because 10 years ago, I watched my sister beg for help that never came. She had a baby, no mate, no pack. She wrote letters to every welfare office, every assistance program, every family member who might care. No one helped. By the time I found out how bad things were, it was too late. She died of pneumonia, in a housing unit that had no heat. The baby died 3 days later." Starvation and exposure. Raina's throat closed. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, not knowing what to say to that, how to respond to that kind of devastating honesty. "I'm sorry," she finally typed. "I'm so sorry that happened." Her name was Marin. She was 23. The baby was a girl. 4 months old. Same age as Lila. The same age. God. He'd been reliving his sister's death every time he asked about Lila. Every time he sent food. Every time he made sure Raina was eating. "I'm not her," Raina wrote carefully. "And Lila isn't your niece. You don't owe us this." "I know. But maybe I owe it to them." And there it was. The truth. He wasn't saving her. He was trying to save his sister. 10 years too late. Raina should have been angry about that. Should have resented being someone's redemption project. But all she felt was a strange, aching understanding. Because wasn't she doing the same thing? Pouring everything into Lila, to make up for all the ways she'd failed Jacob, all the ways she'd been failing herself. They were both trying to rewrite histories that couldn't be changed. "Thank you for telling me," she typed. "And thank you for the help. Really. You saved us. You saved yourself. I just made it easier." That night, as Raina fed Lila her bedtime bottle and looked around the apartment that felt less like a tomb and more like a home, she realized something dangerous. She was starting to depend on those texts, on the daily check-ins that made her feel like someone in the world cared, whether she survived the day. On the voice behind the screen that was sharp and commanding but never cruel. She was starting to depend on Darius Kale. And dependency, she knew from bitter experience, was just another word for vulnerability. Another way to get hurt when the person you relied on inevitably left. But she saved every text anyway. Read them over at night like prayers. And when she finally slept, she dreamed of a king with sad eyes who delivered formula at 3 in the morning and asked if she'd eaten. In those dreams, she never asked why he really came. She was afraid of the answer. Chapter 4. When texts aren't enough. The texts continued for 2 weeks, and somewhere in that time, they stopped being about Lila. Oh, they still started with Lila. How is she? How many ounces? Any fever or unusual fussiness? But then they'd drift. Raina would mention something small, like how Lila had smiled for the first time, and he'd ask what it looked like. She'd describe it, and somehow that would lead to him asking what made Raina smile, which led to her admitting she couldn't remember the last time she had. "That's going to change," he'd written, with such certainty that she almost believed him. The evening texts became longer, more personal. He asked about her transcription work, and she found herself explaining how she'd loved the puzzle of it, taking chaotic audio and transforming it into clean, organized text. How she'd liked feeling useful, even if it was just from behind a screen. "You could do it again," he'd suggested. "Work from home. I could arrange contracts." "I don't want your charity," she'd responded. Defensive. It's not charity, it's employment. You'd be good at it. They'd be lucky to have you. She'd let herself think about that for a day before responding. Maybe, after Lila's a bit older, when I can focus. Whenever you're ready, he'd written back. And then, after a pause, I'm patient. Something about that phrase had made her pulse quicken. Patient implied waiting. Waiting implied he planned to stick around. That this wasn't just a temporary intervention that would end once his guilt was satisfied. By the third week, the texts had developed a rhythm. Morning check-in about Lila. Afternoon message about food. He'd stopped having meals delivered every day, but he'd text to ask if she'd eaten, and somehow she found herself incapable of lying to him. Evening conversations that ranged from the mundane to the surprisingly deep. She learned things about him in those evening texts. He hated public ceremonies but attended 73 of them last year alone. He'd taught himself to cook after Marin died because he couldn't stand the palace chef's pitying looks when he'd eat alone. He read philosophy, the depressing kind, he'd joked, the kind that confirmed life was suffering. He hadn't shifted into his wolf form in 6 years, because his wolf form still looked for his sister in crowds. That last confession had come late one night, and Raina had stared at her phone for 20 minutes, trying to figure out how to respond. Finally, she'd just written, "Grief doesn't work on a schedule. You shift when you're ready. What if I'm never ready? Then you're never ready." That's allowed too. My advisors say, a king who can't shift is a king who can't lead. Your advisors sound like assholes. She'd regretted it the moment she hit send you. Didn't call the king's advisors assholes, even over text. But his response had been a single word that somehow conveyed amusement. Accurate. Raina learned to recognize his moods through text. Short, clipped responses meant he'd had a difficult day with politics or council meetings. Longer messages, sometimes rambling, meant he was tired, and his usual control was slipping. Questions about her childhood or her dreams meant he was trying to distract himself from something he didn't want to think about. She started asking her own questions. What was the palace like? Cold, he said. Beautiful but cold. Did he actually wear a crown? Only during formal events, and it gave him headaches. What did he do for fun? A long pause. Then, I don't remember. That answer had broken something in her chest. Everyone needs something that's just for them, she'd written. Something that has nothing to do with duty or responsibility. What did you used to do? Before you were king? I used to paint, he'd admitted after another long pause. Landscapes, mostly. I was terrible at it. But Marin always said the point wasn't being good. It was about paying attention to something beautiful long enough to recreate it. Do you still have your supplies? Somewhere. Probably dried out by now. Buy new ones. Paint something. Even if it's terrible. Why? Because I said so. She'd added a smiley face to soften it, her first emoji in their entire conversation. His response had come an hour later. A photo. A canvas with messy brushstrokes of blue and gray, barely recognizable as a sky. And underneath, "It's terrible. It's a start," she'd written back. "Do it again tomorrow." And he had. Every night for a week, he'd send a photo of whatever he'd painted. They were all objectively bad, the kind of amateur work that looked like a child had done it, but they got slightly less rigid each time, like he was remembering how to play. "Thank you," he'd texted on the 7th night. "For what?" "For giving me something to do with my hands, besides break things." Raina had stared at that message for a long time, trying to imagine the king, the powerful, controlled, commanding presence, who'd stood in her kitchen as someone who broke things when he got overwhelmed. It didn't match the image. But then again, nothing about their growing. Friendship? Connection? Whatever this was, matched any image she'd had of how kings were supposed to behave. By the 4th week, Raina realized she looked forward to the texts more than anything else in her day. More than Lila's smiles, more than the meals that showed up, more than the slowly growing balance in her bank account as she carefully managed the money he'd given her. She looked forward to the moment her phone would buzz, and she'd see his name. She'd changed the contact from "the king who came" to just Darius, in the second week, though she couldn't remember making that decision consciously. She looked forward to the conversations that made her feel like a person again, instead of just a collection of failures and responsibilities. She looked forward to being seen, and that terrified her, because Jakob had been dead for 6 months, and she was starting to feel things for a man she'd never really met. A man who'd only stood in her apartment once, for maybe 15 minutes. A man she knew through words on a screen and nothing else. It wasn't real. It couldn't be real. This was just, what? Gratitude? Loneliness? Two broken people finding each other in the dark and mistaking proximity for connection? She should pull back. Should let the texts become shorter, more formal, until they faded entirely. She was stable now. Lila was healthy. The crisis had passed. There was no reason to keep this going. But on the 28th day, her phone buzzed at an unusual time, 2 p.m., when he was usually in meetings, and the message made her heart stop. I need to see you. Not a question, not a request. A statement of need that felt raw in a way his texts never were. Raina's hands shook as she typed. Is something wrong? Yes. No. I don't know. I just need to see you. In person. Not through a screen. Why? Because I'm starting to forget that you're real. Oh. Oh God. Raina sat down hard on her couch, Lila drowsing in the bassinet beside her, and tried to control her breathing. He was starting to forget she was real, as if she wasn't the one who'd been having the same problem, who'd started to wonder if Darius was just an elaborate fantasy she'd created to cope with isolation. When? She typed. Tonight. I'll come to you. Why after dark? Because if I show up at your building during the day, there will be press and security, and it will stop being about you and me. You and me. As if they were a unit. A pair. Okay, she wrote. Because what else could she say? What time? 10. Is that too late? No. Lila usually sleeps by then. I'll see you tonight, Raina. She stared at that message for a long time after he sent it. Then she looked around her apartment, cleaner now, better stocked, but still shabby, still obviously the home of someone struggling, and felt panic claw up her throat. He was coming here, in person, and this time it wouldn't be an emergency at 3 in the morning when she was too exhausted to care what he thought. This time she'd have hours to overthink everything, to notice all the ways she wasn't good enough for this, whatever this was becoming. She spent the afternoon in a fog of anxiety. Fed Lila, changed her, bathed her, and dressed her in one of the new onesies the food delivery had included one day, soft cotton with little stars on it. Got Lila down for her evening nap by 8. Then Raina showered for the first time in 3 days and actually dried her hair. Put on clean clothes, the nicest she owned, which wasn't saying much. A soft sweater Jakob had bought her 2 Christmases ago, and jeans that fit better now that she was eating regularly. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She'd lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, her face too thin, shadows under her eyes from months of poor sleep. But there was color in her cheeks now, life in her eyes that had been dead for a long time. At 9:55, she sat on her couch and watched the door like it might attack her. At exactly 10, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the apartment. Raina opened the door, and there he was. Darius Kale, Alpha King, the man she'd been texting for 4 weeks. The man she'd started to. No. She wouldn't finish that thought. He looked different than she remembered. Less intimidating somehow, though he was still massive and still radiated power that made her knees weak. But he was wearing jeans and a dark Henley instead of the expensive coat, and his hair was slightly disheveled, like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked tired, human. Hi, she said, eloquent as ever. Hi. He stepped inside when she moved back, and this time she noticed the way he took in the space, not with judgment, but with something else. Recognition, maybe. It looks different. You brought supplies. Things look different when you're not starving. A muscle in his jaw ticked. Don't what? Don't joke about that. I don't find it funny. She hadn't been joking, not really, but she nodded anyway. Sorry. They stood there in her tiny living room, 3 feet apart, and Raina realized she had no idea what to do now. The texts had been easy. She could think before responding, could control the conversation, could hide behind words. But here, in person, with him looking at her like he was trying to memorize her face, she felt exposed. "Do you want to sit?" she finally asked. "No." He took a step closer, and her breath caught. "I want to understand something." "What?" "Why you haven't asked." "Asked what?" "Why I'm really doing this. The food, the money, the texts. You haven't asked once what I want from you. Why not?" Raina swallowed hard. Because she'd been afraid of the answer. Because she'd wanted to live in the fantasy a little longer. Because asking meant confronting whatever this was, and she wasn't ready for it to be real yet. "I don't know," she lied. "Yes, you do." He took another step, close enough now that she could smell him pine and smoke and something darker. "You're afraid I'll tell you the truth." "What truth?" "That I'm not doing this for Marin anymore." His voice was rough, lower than usual. "That somewhere in the last 4 weeks, this stopped being about saving my sister and started being about you. Just you." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying, and exactly what she'd been afraid to hope for. "That's not," she started, but he cut her off. "I think about you constantly, morning, noon, night. I check my phone every 10 minutes to see if you've texted. I've rearranged meetings so I don't miss our evening conversations. I've started painting because you told me to, and I actually care about whether you think it's getting better. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" Raina's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "You barely know me. I know you take care of everyone except yourself. I know you're so damn stubborn you'd rather starve than ask for help. I know you tell your daughter stories about brave Omegas because you want her to grow up believing she can be strong. I know you haven't bought yourself a single piece of clothing with the money I gave you, but you did buy that ridiculous stuffed wolf for Lila. I know you laugh at my terrible jokes even when they're not funny. I know you see me, Raina, not the king. Me." "Stop," she whispered, taking a step back. "Just stop." "Why?" "Because this isn't real. You feel guilty about your sister, and I'm convenient and lonely, and we're both just Breda. We're using each other to feel less broken." "You actually believe that?" "I don't know what I believe. My mate died 6 months ago. 6 months, Darius. I shouldn't be feeling anything for anyone, especially not for someone I've met exactly twice." "Then tell me you don't." He moved closer, backing her up against the wall. Not threatening, he left space for her to move away if she wanted, but intense, focused entirely on her. "Tell me you don't think about me. Tell me the texts don't matter. Tell me you don't look forward to them the way I do. Tell me I'm alone in this." She opened her mouth to say exactly that, to lie and end this before it became something she couldn't survive losing. But the words wouldn't come, because she did think about him, all the time. In the quiet moments when Lila slept and the apartment was still, she thought about his voice and his terrible paintings and the way he said her name like it mattered. She thought about how he'd looked standing in her kitchen making a bottle, how careful his scarred hands had been, how he'd watched her fall apart and hadn't looked away. She thought about how he made her feel seen in a way Jakob never had. If she was being honest, Jakob had loved her, but he'd loved the version of her that fit into his pack, his life, his plans. Darius seemed to love the messy, broken, too honest version that didn't fit anywhere. "I can't do this," she finally said, and her voice broke on the words. I can't be what you need. I'm a widow with a baby and no pack and no money, and I live in a converted storage room in the worst part of the city. You're the king. This doesn't make sense. None of that matters." "Yes, it does. It all matters. What do you think happens here, Darius? You just show up and we play house and everyone's fine with the king dating some packless Omega. Your advisors will have a stroke. The press will destroy me. And when you get tired of this, I won't. You don't know that. People get tired. They leave. They die. And I can't." Her voice cracked completely. "I can't survive losing someone else. I won't." The silence after her confession felt enormous. Darius stared at her, and she saw the exact moment he understood. This wasn't about him. This was about Jakob, about her father who'd offered her up to settle a debt, about Mira and the pack who'd abandoned her the moment she became inconvenient. About every person who'd proved that love was just another temporary arrangement that ended the moment you stopped being useful. Raina. He said her name gently. And it was somehow worse than anger would have been. I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that. I can. I am. Why? The word came out desperate, pleading. Why would you promise something like that? You barely know me. This could all be because in 4 weeks of texts, you've seen me more clearly than people who've known me my entire life. Because you told me to paint and didn't laugh when the results were garbage. Because you're the first person in 10 years who's made me want to be something other than angry. Because when I'm talking to you, I forget I'm supposed to be a king and just get to be someone who exists. Is that enough of a reason? It should have been. It was beautiful and honest and exactly what she'd wanted to hear. But Raina's entire life had taught her that beautiful things broke, that honest people lied eventually, that wanting something was the fastest way to lose it. I need time, she whispered. I need to think. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or pain. But he nodded. Okay. How much time? I don't know. Days? Weeks? I need to figure out if this is real or if we're both just really lonely. It's real, he said with absolute certainty. But I'll wait while you catch up. He moved toward the door, and panic surged through her. This was wrong. This felt like an ending, and she didn't want it to end even though she'd just pushed him away. Darius. He stopped, hand on the doorknob, and looked back. Will you still text me? While I figure this out? His expression softened. Every day, if you want me to. I do. Then I will. He opened the door, paused. Raina? One more thing. What? Jakob was an idiot. She blinked. What? If I'd had you, I would have fought death itself to stay. I would have made you the center of my world and made sure you knew it every single day. He didn't. He left you unprepared and unprotected. And that's unforgivable. You deserved better than that. And then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Raina standing in her apartment with tears streaming down her face and a truth she wasn't ready to face sitting heavy in her chest. She'd loved Jakob. Of course she had. But Darius was right. She deserved better. And maybe terrifyingly, impossibly, she was starting to believe she might actually get it. Don't forget to subscribe. Chapter 5. The breaking point. The texts continued, just like he promised. But they were different now. Careful. Like they were both walking on glass and trying not to cut themselves. How is she? He'd ask every morning. And Raina would respond with details about Lila's eating and sleeping and the new sounds she was making. Safe topics. Neutral ground. But then the afternoon would come, and he'd send something that made her chest ache. I painted something today that didn't make me want to set it on fire. Progress. Or, the council meeting went long. They argued for 3 hours about fishing regulations. I thought about you the entire time, and it was the only thing that kept me from walking out. Or, on the 3rd day, I miss talking to you. Really talking. Not this careful dance we're doing. That one had made her stare at her phone for 20 minutes before responding. I miss it too. Because she did. God, she missed it. Missed the easy flow of conversation they'd built over 4 weeks. Missed feeling like she had someone who actually understood her. Missed the way he'd challenge her when she said something self-deprecating. The way he'd share pieces of himself that she knew he didn't show anyone else. But every time she thought about letting her guard down again, about admitting that yes, this was real, and yes, she felt it too, fear would wrap around her throat and choke the words before they could form. What if he changed his mind? What if this was just a phase, a distraction from his grief that would fade once he processed what he was really feeling? What if she let herself love him and then watched him walk away like everyone else had? On the 5th day, Mira texted her. It was the first time she'd heard from her former sister-in-law since the night Raina had begged for help. The message was short. I heard you're doing better. I'm glad. Raina stared at it, something bitter rising in her throat. Mira had heard she was doing better. Probably from pack gossip. probably wondering how a widow with nothing had suddenly gotten back on her feet. She typed and deleted 3 responses before settling on, "No thanks to you." The 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "That's fair. I'm sorry, Raina. I really am," Derek said. "I don't care what Derek said. You are my friend. I thought that mattered more than pack politics." It did. It does. But you don't understand how hard it is when the pack tells you to choose. I understand perfectly. You chose them. That's fine. But don't text me now looking for absolution because you heard through the grapevine that I survived without you. This time, the 3 dots appeared and stayed for almost a minute. Then, "You're right. I'm sorry. I hope things keep getting better for you." Raina blocked the number before she could see if there was more. But the exchange left her shaken, reminded her of exactly why she'd built walls in the first place. People chose themselves. Always. It was naive to think otherwise. She was still stewing about it when Darius's evening text came through. "Bad day? How can you tell? Your afternoon text was 3 words instead of your usual paragraph. What happened?" And there it was, that attention to detail. That noticing of patterns she didn't even realize she had. She could brush it off. Say she was just tired. Keep the wall firmly in place. Instead, she found herself typing out the entire exchange with Mira. How it had felt to be abandoned by people she thought were family. How it had reminded her that trust was just another word for future betrayal. His response came quickly. "She doesn't deserve your forgiveness. I wasn't planning to give it." Good. Some things are unforgivable. Then, after a pause, "But Raina, not everyone is Mira. Not everyone will choose wrong when it matters. How do you know? How do you know you won't? Because I've already had my chance to choose wrong. When you told me you needed time, I could have pushed. Could have used my position or my resources or any number of things to force the issue. I didn't. I won't. Your choice is your own, always, even if you choose to walk away." Raina read that message 5 times, each time feeling something crack in her chest. "I'm scared," she finally admitted. "I know. What if I'm not ready? What if I never am? Then we stay like this, texting, being friends, whatever you can handle. That's not fair to you. Let me worry about what's fair to me. You worry about healing." She fell asleep that night with her phone clutched in her hand, those messages pulled up on the screen, and dreamed of a future where she was brave enough to choose something good. The crisis came on the 8th day. Raina woke up at 4 a.m. to Lila screaming. Not the hungry cry or the tired cry, the pain cry that every mother learned to recognize with dread. She scooped her daughter up and immediately felt the heat radiating from her small body. Fever. High fever. Lila's face was flushed, her eyes glassy, her body rigid with discomfort. "No, no, no," Raina whispered, carrying her to the bathroom to get the thermometer. Her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to get an accurate reading. 103,4 degrees. Panic slammed into her. Babies this young weren't supposed to spike fevers this high. This was emergency room territory. This was dangerous. She grabbed her phone with one hand while trying to soothe Lila with the other. Her mind raced through options. She could call an ambulance, but that was minimum $500 she didn't have. She could try to get to the emergency room herself, but she didn't have a car, and the buses didn't run this early. She could. Her fingers were dialing before she consciously decided to do it. The phone rang twice before his sleep-rough voice answered. "Raina? What's wrong?" "It's Lila. She has a fever. 103.4. I don't know what to do. I don't have a car and the buses aren't running, and I can't afford an ambulance, but she's so hot, and she won't stop crying. Breathe." His voice cut through her panic like a knife, sharp and commanding. "I need you to breathe and listen to me. Can you do that?" "Yes." She sucked in air, forced herself to focus. "Good. Have you given her anything for the fever?" "No, I was just about to." "Do that now. Infant fever reducer, the dosage on the bottle for her weight. Then get a lukewarm, not cold, lukewarm washcloth, and put it on her forehead. I'm sending a car. It'll be there in 10 minutes. The driver will take you to the Royal Medical Center. They're expecting you. I can't go to the Royal Medical Center. That's for people I say can go there. Get her ready. The car is coming. He hung up before she could argue. Raina moved on autopilot, giving Lila the medicine with shaking hands, gently wiping her down with a lukewarm cloth, grabbing the diaper bag she kept stocked for emergencies. She was still in her pajamas, worn sweatpants, and one of Jacob's old shirts, but there was no time to change. Exactly 10 minutes later, headlights illuminated her window. The car was black and sleek, the kind with darkened windows that screamed money and power. The driver, a professional-looking beta in a suit, opened the door for her without a word and drove with efficient speed through the empty early morning streets. The Royal Medical Center was in the palace complex, a building Raina had only ever seen from a distance. Walking through the doors felt surreal, like she'd stepped into another world. Everything was clean and bright and expensive in a way that made her shabby clothes feel like a costume. A doctor was waiting at the entrance, an older alpha woman with kind eyes and competent hands who took Lila immediately and started examining her while asking Raina rapid-fire questions. How long had she been feverish? Any other symptoms? Recent changes in feeding or sleeping? Raina answered everything in a daze, watching as they hooked her baby up to monitors and took her temperature and checked her ears and throat. Ear infection, the doctor finally pronounced. Both ears, actually. Painful but treatable. We'll start her on antibiotics immediately, and the fever should come down within a few hours. You got her here just in time another day, and this could have gotten much worse. Relief hit Raina so hard her knees buckled. The doctor caught her arm, guided her to a chair. She's going to be fine, the doctor said gently. I promise. But I want to keep her here for observation for a few hours. Make sure the antibiotics start working, and the fever comes down. You can stay with her. Raina nodded, not trusting her voice. They moved Lila to a private room, because of course, it was a private room. This was the Royal Medical Center, and Raina sat in the chair next to the hospital crib, holding her daughter's small hand and trying to stop shaking. It was only then, with the immediate crisis over, that she realized she'd called Darius. In her moment of absolute panic, when she needed help desperately, her first instinct had been to call him. Not Mira, not the pack, not any of the people who were supposed to be her family. Him. And he'd answered. At 4 a.m., he'd answered his phone on the second ring and immediately taken control of the situation. Had sent a car, had arranged for the best medical care, had made sure she and Lila were taken care of without question or hesitation. Her phone buzzed. A text from Darius. The doctor called. She said Lila's stable. How are you? Raina's vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back since the moment she'd felt that fever. I'm okay. Thank you. Thank you for everything. I don't know what I would have done if. You would have figured it out. You always do. But I'm glad I could help. You did more than help. You saved her. Again. No. The antibiotics saved her. I just made sure she got to them faster. She stared at that message, at the way he deflected credit even now, and something inside her chest finally cracked completely. This man had answered her call at 4 a.m., had arranged everything without asking what she'd give in return, had checked on her even though she'd told him she needed time, that she wasn't sure, that she was scared. He'd shown up, again, when it mattered most, and she'd been pushing him away because she was afraid he'd leave. But he wasn't Jakob, who died and left her unprepared. He wasn't her father, who'd traded her like property. He wasn't Mira or the pack who'd abandoned her when things got hard. He was Darius, who texted her every day, who painted terrible pictures because she'd asked him to, who remembered her patterns and noticed when she was having a bad day, who'd stood in her apartment and told her Jakob was an idiot for not fighting harder to stay, who kept choosing her, over and over, even when she gave him every reason not to. She typed, "Can you come here? To the medical center?" The response was immediate. "I'm already here. 4th floor waiting room. Didn't want to intrude but wanted to be close in case you needed anything." Of course he was. Of course he'd come to the hospital himself instead of just sending a car. Of course he'd been waiting, just in case. Room 412. Come now, please. 2 minutes later, there was a soft knock on her door. Raina stood up, her heart pounding for entirely different reasons now, and opened it. Darius stood in the hallway wearing jeans and a hastily pulled-on shirt, his hair a mess like he'd rolled out of bed and driven straight here. He looked tired and worried. And absolutely perfect. "Is she?" he started, but Raina cut him off by stepping forward and wrapping her arms around him. He froze for a half-second, surprised. Then his arms came around her and pulled her close. He was warm and solid and smelled like pine and safety, and Raina buried her face in his chest and finally let herself cry. Not the quiet, controlled tears she'd allowed herself before. Full, body-shaking sobs that she'd been holding back for months. For Jacob, and for her father, and for every person who'd abandoned her. For the fear and the loneliness and the desperate nights when she'd thought she wouldn't survive this. Darius held her through all of it, one hand stroking her hair, the other wrapped firmly around her waist like he was anchoring her to earth. He didn't tell her it was okay, or that everything would be fine. He just held her and let her break apart in his arms. When she finally ran out of tears, she pulled back just enough to look up at him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what? For pushing you away, for being scared, for making you wait." "Raina, no, let me finish." She took a shaky breath. "You asked me if I thought about you. If the texts mattered. I do. They do. Every single day. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up, and the last thing before I sleep. I look forward to your messages more than anything else in my life except Lila, and that terrifies me because everyone I've ever cared about has left or died or stopped choosing me. But tonight, when I was scared and alone and didn't know what to do, I called you. Not because you're the king, not because you have resources, but because some part of me knew you'd answer, that you'd help, that you'd show up. And you did." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs wiping away the tears still tracking down her cheeks. "I'll always show up. I told you that. I know, and I'm starting to believe it. But Darius, I'm still scared. I'm still broken in a lot of ways. I still have a baby and no pack, and I live in a storage room, and I'm probably going to mess this up. Then we'll figure it out together. What if it's too complicated? What if—" He kissed her. It was gentle and desperate all at once, his lips soft against hers, his hands careful like she was something precious he was afraid to break. Raina made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob and kissed him back, pouring every confused feeling into it, the fear and the hope and the overwhelming relief of finally, letting herself fall. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Does that answer your questions?" he asked, his voice rough. "Some of them." "Good. Because I'm not going anywhere, Raina. Not today, not tomorrow, not when things get complicated. I'm in this, completely, if you'll have me." She looked up at him, this powerful, dangerous alpha king who'd shown up at 4 a.m. because her baby was sick, who'd held her while she cried, who was looking at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for years, and made her choice. Okay, I'm in too. Scared and broken and probably going to mess everything up. But I'm in. The smile that broke across his face was blinding. Yeah. She managed a watery laugh. But you're going to have to be patient with me. I'm not good at this anymore. I told you. I'm very patient. He kissed her forehead, soft and sweet. And for the record, you don't mess everything up. You're doing an incredible job with Lila. You're surviving impossible circumstances. You're stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. That's because you're measuring yourself against the wrong standard. Strength isn't never falling apart. It's falling apart and choosing to get back up anyway. You do that every single day. A soft cry from the crib interrupted them. Lila was waking up, her fever-glazed eyes blinking open in confusion. Raina moved to her immediately, lifting her daughter carefully. "Hey baby. Mama's here. You're okay." Darius stayed back, giving them space, but his eyes were on them both with an expression so tender it made Raina's throat tight. "Do you want to hold her?" she asked softly. He looked startled. "Are you sure?" "Yeah, come here." She showed him how to support Lila's head, how to hold her against his chest. He was awkward at first, this powerful king who commanded armies suddenly uncertain about how to handle a 4-month-old baby, But Lila settled against him with a small sigh, her fever-warm cheek pressed to his chest. She trusts you, Raina said, watching them. She barely knows me. Neither did I, but I trusted you anyway. She stepped closer, leaning against his side. I still do. They stood like that for a long moment. Darius, holding Lila, Raina pressed against his side, forming a strange little unit in a hospital room at 6 a.m. It should have felt wrong. Too fast. Too complicated. Instead, it felt like the first right thing that had happened to Raina in a very long time. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we wait for Lila's fever to break. We make sure the antibiotics work. We get you both home safely. He paused. And then we figure out the rest as we go. Together. Your advisors are going to hate this. They hate everything I do. It's their job. The press is going to have a field day. Let them. I don't care what they think. I live in a storage room. Not forever. But if that's where you want to stay, I'll come to you. Location doesn't matter. Raina looked up at him. At this impossible man who kept saying impossible things with such certainty, and felt the last of her resistance crumble. I love you, she said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff. I know it's too soon and I know it doesn't make sense, but I do. I love you. Darius's arms tightened around Lila, and when he looked down at Raina, his eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. I love you too. Have for weeks. Was just waiting for you to catch up. Arrogant, she said, but she was smiling. Confident, he corrected. Then, softer. And patient. Don't forget patient. The doctor knocked before entering, checking Lila's temperature again, and nodding with satisfaction. Fever's coming down. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. She's responding well. After the doctor left, Darius carefully handed Lila back to Raina and pulled out his phone. What are you doing? She asked. Clearing my schedule for the day. I'm staying. You can't just clear your schedule. You're the king. I can do whatever I want. That's the benefit of being king. He looked at her seriously. Unless you'd rather I leave? No. The word came out more forcefully than she'd intended. Stay, please. So he did. He stayed while they waited for Lila's fever to break completely. Stayed while Raina dozed in the uncomfortable hospital chair and woke up to find him watching over them both. Stayed while the nurses came and went, treating him with deference but mostly leaving them alone. Stayed until the doctor declared Lila healthy enough to go home with a prescription and strict instructions about follow-up care. And when they finally left the hospital, Raina carrying Lila, Darius carrying the diaper bag and the prescriptions, and looking completely ridiculous doing it, she realized something important. She'd spent 6 months learning how to survive alone. But maybe, just maybe it was time to learn how to live with someone again. Even if that someone was a king who painted terrible pictures and showed up at 4 a.m. and loved her despite all the ways she was broken. Especially because of that. Chapter 6. When the World Intrudes. 3 weeks passed in a bubble that Raina knew couldn't last forever. Darius came to her apartment every night after his obligations ended. Sometimes at 8, sometimes at midnight, but he always came. They'd sit on her worn couch with Lila between them. And he'd tell her about his day. The mind-numbing council meetings. The diplomatic dinners where everyone talked without saying anything real. The constant weight of decisions that affected thousands of lives. And she'd tell him about hers, how Lila had rolled over for the first time. How she'd finally worked up the courage to reach out to a transcription company about freelance work. How the neighbor down the hall had actually smiled at her yesterday, instead of looking through her like she was invisible. Small things. Normal things. The kind of things that built a life. He'd started leaving clothes in her closet. Just a few things. A spare shirt. Sweatpants. A toothbrush in her bathroom. Physical evidence that he was weaving himself into her existence. That this wasn't just visits but something more permanent. They hadn't slept together. Not in that way. He'd fall asleep on her couch some nights, too exhausted to make the drive back to the palace. And she'd cover him with a blanket and watch him sleep, this powerful man who looked almost vulnerable in rest. Other nights, she'd fall asleep against his shoulder while he held Lila, and wake up to find herself carefully tucked into her bed. Lila in her bassinet beside her, and a note on the nightstand. Had to go. Early meeting. Text me when you wake up. D. It was domestic and sweet, and absolutely terrifying in how much she'd come to depend on it. But the bubble had cracks. She could feel them forming. It started small. A photographer outside her building one morning, camera ready, asking if she had a comment about rumors of a relationship with His Majesty. She'd said nothing, just hurried inside with Lila, but her hands had shaken for an hour afterward. Then came the letter, slipped under her door, from the Omega Housing Authority. We've received inquiries regarding your current living situation and sources of support. Please contact our office to schedule a follow-up evaluation. Raina had shown it to Darius that night, and his jaw had gone tight. They're fishing, he'd said, voice clipped with barely controlled anger. Someone told them to look into you. Who? I'll find out. But 3 days later, it got worse. She was at the corner store, Lila strapped to her chest in a carrier, when she overheard 2 Omegas talking in the next aisle. Can you believe it? The king, slumming with some packless widow. My sister works in the palace kitchens, and she said the entire council is losing their minds. Well, what did he expect? She's obviously a gold digger. Probably saw an opportunity and took it. I heard she has a baby from a dead mate. Imagine trying to trap a king with another man's child. Desperate. Just desperate. Women like that give all Omegas a bad name. Raina had stood frozen, Lila making soft sounds against her chest, while those words carved into her like knives. Gold digger. Desperate. Trapping him. She'd left the store without buying anything, walked home in a daze, and spent the rest of the day staring at nothing, while Lila napped. When Darius came that night, she tried to act normal, but he'd taken one look at her face and known. What happened? Nothing. Raina. I said nothing. Can we just watch something mindless on TV? I don't want to think tonight. He'd let it go, but she could feel him watching her, worried, throughout the evening. The real breaking point came a week later. Raina's phone rang at 2 p.m., an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Is this Raina Garrick? A woman's voice, professional and cold. Yes? This is Magistrate Elena Corvus from the Royal Council. I'm calling to inform you that you've been summoned to appear before the council in 3 days' time to discuss your association with His Majesty, King Darius Kale. Raina's blood went cold. Summoned? I don't understand. I haven't done anything illegal. This isn't a criminal matter, Miss Garrick. This is a matter of propriety and royal protocol. The king's personal relationships are subject to council oversight, particularly when they involve individuals of questionable status. Questionable status? Raina's voice came out sharper than intended. I'm a citizen of Valderan. I have rights. Of course you do. Which is why this is a summons, not an arrest warrant. We simply wish to discuss the nature of your relationship with His Majesty and ensure that all parties understand the implications of such an association. Failure to appear will result in a formal investigation into your affairs, including your custody arrangements. The threat was clear. Come answer our questions, or we'll take your daughter. I'll be there, Raina said through numb lips. Excellent. 3 p.m., Thursday. The council chambers in the west wing of the palace. Don't be late. The line went dead. Raina sat there, phone clutched in her hand, trying to breathe through the panic rising in her chest. The council was summoning her to discuss her relationship with Darius, and they'd threatened Lila to ensure compliance. She should call him, should tell him immediately. But something stopped her, because this was exactly what she'd been afraid of. The world intruding, reality asserting itself. The reminder that she was a packless Omega with nothing, and he was a king, and those two things didn't belong together no matter how much they might want them to. She lasted 2 hours before calling him. Raina? He answered on the first ring, like always. Is everything okay? The council summoned me. The words came out flat, emotionless. Shock, probably. They want to discuss our relationship. Thursday at 3. Silence on the other end. Then, very quietly, fuck. She'd never heard him curse before. Somehow that made it more real. They threatened Lila, she continued. Said if I didn't come, they'd investigate my custody arrangements. They did what? The rage in his voice was palpable. They threatened your daughter to get to me? Apparently your personal relationships are subject to council oversight. Like hell they are. I'll handle this. You don't have to go. Yes, I do. If I don't, they'll come after Lila. And even if you stop them this time, they'll just wait for another opportunity. They've made it clear I'm a problem that needs to be dealt with. You're not a problem, Raina. I'm a packless Omega widow with a dead mate's baby, involved with the king. I'm exactly the kind of scandal they're trained to eliminate. She took a shaky breath. Maybe they're right. Maybe this was a mistake. Don't. The command in his voice was sharp. Don't do that. Don't let them make you doubt this. I'm not doubting us. I'm being realistic. You have responsibilities, a kingdom to run. You can't just, I can do whatever I want. I'm the king. No, you can't. That's the point. You're the king, which means you belong to Valderan before you belong to yourself, before you belong to me. And I won't be the reason you fail your people. Raina, I have to go. Lila needs to be fed. We're not done talking about this. I know, but I need time to think. I'll see you Thursday. At the council meeting. She hung up before he could argue, before the tears she was holding back could fall, before she could take back the distance she'd just put between them. Her phone immediately started ringing. Darius calling back. She let it go to voicemail. It rang 4 more times over the next hour. Each time, she let it ring. The text started after that. Answer your phone. Raina, please. Let's talk about this. I'm coming over. Fine, don't answer. But I'm not giving up on this. On us. That last one made her cry ugly, gulping sobs while Lila watched her with wide, confused eyes. She didn't want him to give up. But she also didn't want to be the person who destroyed him, who forced him to choose between her and his duty, because she knew what that choice had to be, even if he didn't yet. Thursday arrived too quickly. Raina dressed carefully in the one nice outfit she owned, a simple black dress she'd worn to Jakob's funeral. It felt appropriate somehow. She was mourning something today too. She arranged for her neighbor, an elderly beta woman, who'd warmed to her over the past few weeks to watch Lila, kissed her daughter's forehead, and tried not to think about custody investigations and council decisions that could take her baby away. The palace was as intimidating as she remembered from the medical center visit, but this time she was going deeper into its heart. Through marble halls and past guards who watched her with expressionless faces, upstairs and down corridors until she reached the West Wing, where the council chambers waited. A secretary, another cold-faced beta, checked her in and told her to wait. So she sat on an uncomfortable bench in the hallway and tried to control her breathing. The door opened at exactly 3 p.m., but it wasn't the secretary who appeared. It was Darius. He looked terrible, hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it, dark circles under his eyes, wearing formal council clothes all black with the silver pins that marked him as king but looking like the outfit was strangling him. You actually came, he said. And there was something raw in his voice. You thought I wouldn't? You stopped answering my calls. I needed space to think. And? What did you decide? He stepped closer, and she could see the tension in every line of his body. Are you about to tell me this is over? That the council wins? I don't know what I'm going to say. I came to listen. Then listen to this first. He moved even closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. I love you. That hasn't changed. That won't change, no matter what they say in there. And if they try to use Lila against you, if they threaten your daughter to get to me, I will burn this entire council structure to the ground and rebuild it with people who aren't morally bankrupt. Do you understand me? You can't do that. Watch me. Darius. Your Majesty. The secretary appeared in the doorway, disapproval radiating from every pore. The council is ready. Darius didn't look away from Raina. Together? It was a question, a choice. Walk into that room alone and face the council's judgment, or walk in with him and make a statement about what they were to each other. Raina looked at him, this man who'd answered her call at 4 a.m., who'd held her while she cried, who'd learned to make bottles and paint terrible pictures, and who was standing here now, in formal clothes that represented everything he was supposed to be, asking her to choose him anyway. She took his hand. Together, she said. The smile that broke across his face was fierce. He laced his fingers through hers and pushed open the door to the council chambers. The room was circular, with tiered seating rising around a central floor like an arena. 7 council members sat in their designated spots, 4 alphas, 2 betas, 1 omega, all older, all radiating the kind of power that came from years of political maneuvering. And at the head of them all, in the highest seat, was a woman Reina recognized from news broadcasts, Magistrate Elena Corvus, Alpha, 60-something. Sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued. "Your Majesty," she said, her tone making the title sound like a reprimand. "How kind of you to escort Miss Garrick to her appointment. But this is a council matter. Your presence isn't required." "My presence is absolutely required," Darius said calmly, "seeing as you're interrogating the woman I intend to mate." The chamber went absolutely silent. Reina's head whipped toward him. "Mate?" They hadn't discussed, he hadn't asked. But Darius kept his eyes on the council, his hand tight around hers, and continued. "So unless you'd like to explain why you're threatening the future Queen of Valderin, I suggest we reconsider the purpose of this meeting." Magistrate Corvus's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation. "Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. This woman is the woman I love, the woman who will be my mate, my queen, and the mother to any heirs I produce. Does that clarify things for you?" "She's packless," one of the other council members, a red-faced alpha, burst out. "She has a child from a dead mate. She lives in poverty housing and has no political connections. You cannot possibly think." "I can think whatever I want. And I think she's brave, intelligent, compassionate, and strong enough to handle the role. Her pack status is irrelevant. Her housing situation is temporary. And Lila will be my daughter in every way that matters. Any other concerns?" The Omega Council member, a woman with steel-gray hair, spoke up quietly. "Your Majesty, we're not questioning your feelings. But there are protocols. Security checks, background investigations, public opinion to consider. You cannot simply announce you're taking a mate without." "I can do exactly that. I'm the king." "No," Reina said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "No," Darius repeated, confusion and something like fear crossing his face. Reina took a breath and looked at the council. "He can't do exactly that, because I haven't agreed to be his mate." The chamber erupted, council members talking over each other, shock and satisfaction warring on different faces. Darius's hand tightened almost painfully around hers. "Reina," he started, but she cut him off. "May I speak?" she asked the council. "Since you brought me here to discuss my relationship with His Majesty?" Magistrate Corvus looked intrigued, despite herself. "Proceed." Reina turned to face Darius, even though it hurt to look at the confusion and hurt in his eyes. "You said you love me, and I believe you. I love you too. But you just announced to your entire council that you're going to mate me, and you never asked. You decided, the way kings decide things." "I was protecting you," he said, voice low. "I know, and I'm grateful. But I can't be with someone who makes decisions about my life without consulting me. I've had enough of that. My father decided I was disposable. Jakob's pack decided I wasn't worth supporting. The housing authority keeps deciding whether I'm fit to keep my daughter. I can't. I won't let you decide my future without me, even if your intentions are good." The chamber had gone silent again, everyone watching this play out like theater. "What do you want?" Darius asked, and there was something broken in his voice. "Tell me what you want, and I'll give it to you. I want you to ask me. Actually ask me. Not announce to a room full of politicians what you've decided, but ask me, in private, when it's just us. And I want time to say yes or no, without a council watching and judging, and making it about politics instead of us. And if I ask, what will you say?" Reina looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the fear beneath the royal mask. Fear that she'd say no. Fear that he'd push too hard, too fast. Fear that he'd lost her by trying to protect her. "Ask me and find out," she said softly. Magistrate Corvus cleared her throat. "Miss Garrick, you realize that refusing His Majesty's suit would be my choice," Reina interrupted, looking at the woman. That's the point. It's my choice. Not yours, not the council's, mine. And I'm not going to make it in this room to satisfy your need for control over his life. She turned back to Darius. I'm leaving now. When you're ready to have a conversation instead of making proclamations, you know where to find me. She pulled her hand free from his, and it hurt, God, it hurt, and walked toward the door. Raina, wait. But she kept walking. Out of the council chambers, down the corridors, through the marble halls, out into the cold afternoon air where she could finally breathe. She made it 3 blocks before she had to stop, leaning against a building wall, trying not to fall apart completely. She'd just walked away from the king, in front of his council. After he'd essentially proposed to her, she was either the bravest person alive or the stupidest. Her phone buzzed. A text from Darius. I'm sorry. Then another. You're right. I should have asked. And another. Come back, please. Raina stared at the messages, tears tracking down her cheeks, and typed, I need time. Please give me time. His response took 5 minutes. Okay, I'll wait. But Raina, my answer hasn't changed. I still want you. However long it takes. She sat down, right there on the sidewalk, not caring who saw, and let herself cry for everything that was beautiful and broken and impossible about loving a king who kept trying to save her without asking if she wanted to be saved. Chapter 7. The Silence and the Storm. 5 days passed in agonizing silence. Well, not complete silence. Darius texted her every morning, how is she? And Raina answered with clinical details about Lila's health, but the warmth was gone. The easy conversation. The late-night messages about paintings and dreams and small moments that built a life together. She'd drawn a line, and now they were both standing on opposite sides of it, not knowing how to cross back. Raina threw herself into work. She'd accepted the transcription contracts Darius had arranged, and yes, she knew he'd arranged them, even though he'd never admitted it. But she was good at the work, and they paid fairly, so she swallowed her pride and typed until her fingers cramped. Lila was thriving. At least. Her ear infection had cleared completely, and she was hitting milestones, rolling over consistently now, laughing at silly faces, reaching for objects with increasing coordination, evidence that at least one thing in Raina's life was going right. But the apartment felt empty. Every time she looked at the couch, she saw Darius sleeping there. Every time she opened the closet, his spare shirt hung like an accusation. Every time Lila made a new sound, her first instinct was to text him about it, and then she'd remember they weren't doing that anymore. On the 3rd day, flowers arrived. Expensive ones from an upscale florist, with a card in his handwriting. I'm sorry. D. She put them in water but didn't respond. On the 4th day, a package. Children's books. A dozen of them. Beautiful illustrated editions of classic stories. The note said, For Lila. So she grows up knowing about brave Omegas. Raina cried over that one, holding the books against her chest while Lila napped, but still didn't respond. On the 5th day, nothing came. No flowers. No gifts. Just the morning text about Lila's health. And then silence. That silence was somehow worse than everything else. That evening, as Raina was feeding Lila her dinner, mashed sweet potatoes that ended up more on her face than in her mouth, someone knocked on her door. Hope surged, immediate and pathetic. Maybe it was Darius. Maybe he'd come to actually talk, to ask instead of declare. 2. She opened the door to find Magistrate Elena Corvus standing in her hallway. The alpha woman looked deeply out of place in the dingy corridor of Omega housing, her expensive suit and perfect posture a stark contrast to the peeling paint and water-stained ceiling. Miss Garrick, she said coolly. May I come in? Every instinct screamed at Raina to say no, but Magistrate Corvus was on the Royal Council. Refusing her felt dangerous. Of course, Raina said, stepping back. The magistrate entered and took in the apartment with sharp eyes, noting the books Darius had sent, stacked neatly on the kitchen counter, the flowers, still fresh in their vase, the general cleanliness and order that had only been possible since Darius had helped her get stable. I'm not here in an official capacity, Magistrate Corvus said, which immediately made Raina more nervous. This is a personal visit. Why? Because I'm trying to understand something. The woman turned to face her fully. 5 days ago, you rejected the king in front of the entire council. You humiliated him publicly, walked out on what was essentially a proposal, and left him looking like a fool. Do you have any idea the damage that did to his authority? Raina's spine straightened. I didn't reject him. I rejected being treated like a decision instead of a person. The distinction is meaningless to the council. To them, you're an omega who spurned the king's suit. They're pushing for sanctions against you. Some are calling for your removal from Valderan entirely. Ice flooded Raina's veins. They can't do that. They can recommend it, and normally, the king would be furious enough to support them. A mate rejection is a serious insult in our culture. Magistrate Corvus paused. But do you know what he's doing instead? Raina shook her head, not trusting her voice. He's fighting for you. Every single day, in every single meeting, he's defending your right to choose, your right to time, your right to refuse him, if that's what you decide. He's burned more political capital in 5 days than most kings burn in a year, all to protect a woman who walked away from him. The words hit like physical blows. Raina sank into her kitchen chair, Lila still in her arms, sweet potato smeared across both of them. I didn't know, she whispered. Of course you didn't, because he didn't tell you. Because despite what you seem to think, he understands that you need space. Magistrate Corvus sat in the other chair, uninvited. I came here tonight because I need to know something. Are you planning to accept him? That's none of your business. It's absolutely my business. I'm responsible for the stability of this kingdom. And right now, the king is compromised, distracted, making decisions based on emotion instead of logic. If you're going to reject him permanently, I need to know so I can help him move on. But if you're going to accept him eventually, if you're just making him suffer for the sake of pride or fear, then I need to tell you something important. What? The magistrate leaned forward, and for the first time, her expression softened slightly. Darius Kale is the best king Valderan has had in 3 generations. He's fair, intelligent, and genuinely cares about his people. But he's been broken since his sister died, closed off, going through the motions of ruling without actually living. I watched him become a ghost in expensive clothes, executing his duties perfectly while dying inside. She paused, studying Raina's face, and then you happened. And for the first time in 10 years, I saw him laugh. Actually laugh, not that political smile he uses for cameras. I saw him leave meetings early, something he never does because he had somewhere he'd rather be. I saw him paint, of all things, and actually care about something other than duty. Why are you telling me this? Because you brought him back to life, and now you're killing him again, slowly, and I need to know if it's intentional or if you're just scared. Raina looked down at Lila, who had grabbed her finger and was holding on with sticky, sweet potato-covered hands. I'm terrified, she admitted. Everything in my life has taught me that depending on people is dangerous, that loving people means losing them, that trusting people means getting hurt. Yes, life does teach us that. Magistrate Corvus's voice was surprisingly gentle. I lost my mate 15 years ago. Cancer. He was 43. We'd been together 20 years, and suddenly he was just gone. And I had to decide, let that loss make me never risk loving anyone again, or accept that loving people is always a risk, and it's still worth it. What did you decide? I'm still deciding. Every day. She stood up. But I can tell you this. Darius is not going to leave you by choice. He's not going to wake up one day and decide you're not worth it. The only way you lose him is if you push him away so hard, he has no choice but to go. And from what I've seen, even then he'll just wait, hoping you'll change your mind. Is that supposed to make me feel better? It's supposed to help you make an informed decision. Because you have 3 choices, Miss Garrick. Accept him, and all the complications that come with being the king's mate. Reject him permanently and let him move on, or keep him in this limbo where he can't move forward or back, which is arguably the cruelest option. I told him I needed time. Time to what? Figure out if you love him? You already know you do. Figure out if he loves you? He's made that abundantly clear. Figure out if you're brave enough to risk it? Magistrate Corvus moved toward the door. That's the real question, isn't it? Are you brave enough? She left, before Raina could respond, the door closing with a quiet click that sounded final. Raina sat there for a long time, Lila eventually falling asleep against her chest. Sticky and warm and trusting. She thought about bravery, about what it meant to be brave. She'd always thought bravery was surviving, getting through each day, keeping Lila alive and fed and safe despite everything. But maybe bravery was also choosing to love someone even when everything in your history screamed that it would end badly. Maybe bravery was trusting someone to stay even when no one else had. Maybe bravery was believing she deserved good things even when the world had spent years teaching her otherwise. Her phone buzzed. The morning text from Darius. How is she? But this time, underneath the usual question, he'd added something else. And how are you? I miss you. 3 simple words that cracked something open in her chest. She typed, I miss you too. The response came immediately. Can I see you? Yes. But not here. Can you meet me somewhere? Anywhere. Name it. Raina thought about it. She didn't want the palace with its marble halls and political weight. She didn't want her apartment with its memories of him falling asleep on her couch. She needed neutral ground. There's a park near the Omega district. Riverwalk Park. Tomorrow at noon? I'll be there. That night, Raina barely slept. She kept rehearsing what she'd say, how she'd explain that yes, she was scared, but also yes, she wanted this, that she was sorry for walking out but also not sorry for standing up for herself, that she needed him to understand she couldn't just be swept along by his decisions, even when those decisions were meant to protect her. Morning came too slowly and too fast. She dressed carefully, not the funeral dress this time, but jeans and a soft blue sweater Jacob had always said brought out her eyes. She fed Lila, changed her, packed the diaper bag with obsessive thoroughness. Her neighbor agreed to watch Lila again, bless her. Hot date? The elderly woman asked with a knowing smile. Something like that, Raina admitted. Riverwalk Park was a small strip of green along the river that separated the Omega district from the rest of the city. Not fancy, but maintained well enough. There were benches and walking paths, and a playground that had seen better days. Raina arrived 10 minutes early and immediately spotted him. Darius was sitting on a bench facing the river, wearing civilian clothes, jeans, and a dark jacket, but somehow still looking like royalty. His posture was tense, shoulders tight, hands clasped between his knees like he was physically holding himself together. He hadn't seen her yet. She could watch him for a moment, this powerful man who looked so uncertain right now, and feel her heart break and mend simultaneously. She walked over and sat down beside him. He turned, and the relief that flooded his face was almost painful to witness. Hi, he said. Hi. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the river flow past, the late autumn sun creating patterns on the water. I'm sorry, they said simultaneously. Then both stopped. You first, Raina said. Darius took a deep breath. I'm sorry for announcing to the council that I was going to mate you without asking first. You were right, I was making decisions for you instead of with you. I was so focused on protecting you from them that I became just another person taking away your agency. That's unforgivable. It's not unforgivable. It's just something we need to work on. If we're going to do this, his head whipped toward her. If? When, she corrected softly. When we do this. The hope that blazed across his face made her throat tight. Are you sure? He asked. Because I need you to be sure, Raina. I can't if you're going to leave. I need you to do it now, before I get any more attached. Before this becomes something I can't survive losing. I'm terrified, she admitted. Everything in me is screaming that this will end badly. That you'll leave or die or realize I'm not worth the political nightmare. But Magistrate Corvus came to see me last night, and she said something that stuck with me. Elena came to see you? He looked surprised. What did she say? She asked if I was brave enough. And I've been thinking about that. Because I thought I was brave, I survived Jakob's death. I kept Lila alive through impossible circumstances. I rebuilt my life from nothing. But that's survival, not bravery. Real bravery is choosing to love someone even when you're scared. even when history says it's a terrible idea, even when it might hurt. She turned to face him fully. So yes, I'm sure. I'm scared out of my mind, but I'm sure. I love you. I want to be with you. I want to figure out how to make this work despite the council and the press, and all the complications. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll include me in decisions that affect my life. That you won't try to protect me by taking away my choices. That you'll treat me like a partner, not a responsibility. I promise, he said immediately. I swear it, Reina. We make decisions together. Always. Okay. Then ask me. He blinked. What? Ask me what you were going to ask before I walked out of the council meeting. But ask me for real this time. Not as a king making a proclamation, but as Darius asking Reina. Understanding dawned on his face. He slid off the bench, and for a moment Reina thought he was going to get down on one knee. But instead, he just stood in front of her, taking both her hands in his. Reina Garrick, he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. Would you consider being my mate? Not because I'm the king, and I need a queen. Not because you're grateful for help I gave you, but because I love you, the real you, the stubborn, brave, too honest you who tells me when I'm being an idiot and makes me want to be better than I am. Because I want to spend my life making you laugh and holding you when you cry and watching Lila grow up and maybe having more kids if you want them. Because you're the first person in 10 years who's made me feel like life is worth living instead of just surviving. Will you be my mate? Reina felt tears tracking down her cheeks, but she was smiling. Yes. Yes? Yes, Darius. I'll be your mate. He pulled her up into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, and kissed her like she was air, and he'd been drowning. She kissed him back, pouring everything into it, all the fear and hope and love she'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead against hers. We're going to have to tell the council, he said. I know. They're going to make this difficult. I know. There will be protocols and security checks, and probably a very invasive background investigation. I know. And the press is going to lose their minds when this becomes public. I know. She pulled back enough to look at him. But we'll handle it. Together. Together, he agreed, and kissed her again, softer this time. They stayed at the park for another hour, talking through logistics, when to make the announcement, how to handle the council, what would happen to her housing situation. She'd move into the palace. Eventually, but not immediately because she needed time to adjust. Plans and contingencies and all the complicated realities of loving someone whose life was public property. But underneath all of it was relief. The kind of bone-deep relief that came from finally stopping the fight against something you wanted desperately. As they were leaving, Darius's phone rang. He glanced at it, frowned, and answered. What is it? Reina watched his expression change from annoyed to concerned to something like fear. When? He demanded. How many? No, lock it down. Full security protocols. I'm on my way. He hung up and turned to her, and she knew immediately that something was very wrong. What happened? There's been a breach at the palace. Someone got past security. They found evidence of a planned attack. His jaw was tight. They think it's connected to you, to us. Someone trying to send a message. Ice flooded through her. What kind of message? The kind that comes with death threats and detailed plans of your apartment building. He gripped her arms. You can't go home. It's not safe. Neither is Lila. Lila. Panic seized her. She's with my neighbor. I'm already sending security. They'll bring her to the palace, to the secure wing. But you. He pulled out his phone, typed something rapidly. A car is coming. It'll take you to the palace, too. You'll both be under guard until we figure out who's behind this. Darius, this is because of us. Because someone doesn't want you to mate me. I know. Which is exactly why I'm not letting anything happen to you. He cupped her face. I just got you to say yes. I'm not losing you now. A sleek black car pulled up, and Darius was already pulling her toward it, his body positioned between her and any potential threat. Years of alpha protective instincts taking over. Go, he said, practically pushing her into the car. I'll meet you there as soon as I can. Don't leave the secure wing. Don't answer your door for anyone except guards I've personally cleared. Understand? Yes, but I love you. I'll see you soon. And then he was closing the door and the car was moving, and Reina was being driven toward the palace while her mind raced through everything that had just happened. They'd finally chosen each other, finally committed, finally decided to be brave, and now someone was trying to kill her for it. Don't forget to subscribe. Chapter 8. The Truth in Blood. The palace secure wing was located in the oldest part of the complex, thick stone walls, reinforced doors, and enough guards to make Reina feel like she was both protected and imprisoned. Lila arrived within 20 minutes, carried by a stern-faced female beta guard who handed her over with care. Her neighbor had packed her favorite blanket, and the stuffed wolf Reina had bought her, along with a hastily scrawled note, "Stay safe, dear. I'll water your plants." As if plants mattered when someone was threatening to kill her. Reina fed Lila, changed her, tried to keep her voice calm and soothing even though her hands were shaking. The room they'd been given was luxurious, thick carpets, expensive furniture, a bathroom bigger than her entire apartment, but the windows were reinforced and there were guards stationed outside the door. A prison, no matter how gilded. 2 hours passed. Then 3. Reina's phone had been confiscated, security protocol, so she had no way of knowing what was happening. Was Darius safe? Had they found whoever was behind this? Were there more threats? At hour 4, the door finally opened, but it wasn't Darius who entered. It was Magistrate Elena Corvus, looking grimmer than Reina had ever seen her, followed by 2 guards, and Reina's blood went cold. Her father, Thomas Garrick, stood in the doorway of the secure room, looking older than she remembered, but still carrying that same air of self-righteous certainty that had defined her childhood. His expression when he saw her was complicated shame and anger, and something that might have been regret, all tangled together. "What is he doing here?" Reina demanded, instinctively pulling Lila closer. "Your father came forward this afternoon," Magistrate Corvus said carefully. "He claims to have information about the threats against you." "Information?" Reina's laugh was bitter. "Or did he make them?" Thomas flinched. "I didn't threaten you, Reina. But I know who did." "Talk," Magistrate Corvus commanded. Thomas looked at the floor, unable to meet Reina's eyes. "After Jakob died, after you lost pack protection, Victor Strand approached me. He's an alpha in Jacob's old pack, Derek's second in command. He said the pack was concerned about you becoming a problem." "Hevlice, a problem," Reina repeated flatly. "I was starving and they were concerned I was a problem. They were worried you'd try to claim pack resources through Lila, that you'd use your daughter to extract support you weren't entitled to." Thomas finally looked up. "Victor offered me money to keep tabs on you, to report on your situation. I took it because..." His voice cracked. "Because I needed it. I'm not proud of it. You sold information about your own daughter." Reina's voice was ice. "I thought I was just reporting on how you were doing. I didn't know he'd..." Thomas ran a hand through his thinning hair. "When you started seeing the king, Victor lost his mind. He said you were going to use your connection to take revenge on the pack, that you'd turn the king against them, get them investigated, stripped of their status. He started talking about solving the problem permanently. He threatened to kill me because he thought I'd retaliate against the pack that abandoned me. The absurdity of it would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. I came forward as soon as I realized how serious he was," Thomas said. "I know I've been a terrible father. I know I failed you when you needed me most. But I couldn't let him hurt you. Or Lila." Magistrate Corvus stepped forward. "We have Victor Strand in custody. He had detailed maps of your apartment building, your daily routines, information about where Lila would be vulnerable. He was planning to strike within the week." Reina felt sick. Someone had been watching her, planning to hurt her baby, all because a pack was paranoid about retaliation she'd never even considered. "Where's Darius?" she asked. "Dealing with Victor," Magistrate Corvus said. "And the pack leadership. This situation has escalated." The way she said it made Reina's stomach drop. "What does that mean?" "It means the king is very angry, and when he's angry, he tends to make decisions that are politically complicated." Before Reina could ask what that meant, the door burst open. Darius strode in, and Reina had never seen him look like this, fury radiating from every line of his body. his eyes almost glowing with alpha rage. Behind him were more guards, and between them, Derek, Jakob's brother, the alpha who'd refused to help Reyna when she'd begged, who'd cut her off from the pack without a second thought. He looked terrified. "Tell her," Darius commanded, his voice so cold it made Reyna shiver. "Tell her what you just told me." Derek couldn't seem to look at Reyna directly. Victor acted without pack approval. "We didn't know he was planning to, we wouldn't have condoned." "You're lying," Darius said flatly. "You knew he was watching her. You approved the surveillance budget. You just didn't think he'd actually try to kill her. And now you're trying to distance yourself from the consequences. We were protecting pack interests. By threatening to murder a woman and her infant daughter?" Darius took a step forward, and Derek actually backed up. "By paying her father to spy on her? By treating her like an enemy because she had the audacity to survive after your brother died? She wasn't pack anymore. We had no obligation. You had every obligation." Darius's voice cracked like a whip. "She was your brother's mate, the mother of his child. And you threw her away like garbage because supporting her was inconvenient." Reyna had never heard him like this, all the careful control he usually maintained completely shattered. This was the alpha underneath the king, the predator that political polish usually disguised. "Darius," she said softly. He turned to her immediately, and his expression shifted, the rage banking slightly, replaced by concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Lila's fine. We're both fine. They were going to hurt you." His hands were shaking. "Victor had plans. Detailed plans. If your father hadn't come forward, but he did, and you stopped it." She stood up, still holding Lila, and moved closer to him. "We're safe. You're safe because I got lucky, because Thomas Garrick grew a conscience at the last possible moment. If he hadn't," Darius couldn't seem to finish that sentence. Reyna looked at her father, who was still standing near the door looking miserable. "Why did you come forward?" Thomas met her eyes finally. "Because when I saw you with your daughter, even though I'd failed you in every way, you were still fighting, still surviving, still being a better parent than I ever was. And I realized," his voice broke, "I realized that if I let him hurt you, I'd never be able to look at myself again. I'd already failed you once. I couldn't do it twice. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to make up for offering her up to settle a debt, for taking money to spy on her, for every other way he'd failed as a father. But it was something. Thank you," Reyna said quietly, "for coming forward." Thomas nodded, tears streaming down his face, and turned to leave. "Wait," Darius said, and Thomas froze. "You sold information about your daughter to people who wanted to harm her. You took money to betray your own blood. The only reason you're not joining Victor in a cell is because you eventually did the right thing. But Thomas Garrick, I'm telling you now, if you ever contact Reyna or Lila again without their explicit permission, if you try to profit from their connection to me in any way, if you so much as speak their names in public, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of your life regretting it. Do you understand?" Thomas went pale. "Yes, Your Majesty. Get him out of my sight." The guards escorted Thomas away, leaving Reyna alone with Darius, Magistrate Corvus, and Derek. Darius turned to Derek. "And you. Jakob's pack is hereby under formal investigation. Every member will be interviewed. Every financial record will be audited. If I find evidence that anyone else knew about Victor's plans, they'll join him in prison." "You can't do that," Derek protested. "We have rights. You forfeited those rights when you conspired to murder my mate." The possessiveness in his voice was unmistakable. "The investigation begins tomorrow. You're dismissed." Derek opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, then clearly thought better of it and fled. Once they were alone except for Magistrate Corvus, who seemed to have no intention of leaving, Darius finally let himself move to Reyna. He pulled her into his arms, carefully mindful of Lila between them, and just held her. "I thought I was going to lose you," he said against her hair. "When they showed me those plans, when I saw how detailed they were. But you didn't. I'm here. We're both here. Because of luck. Because your terrible father had one moment of decency. Sometimes that's all it takes. One moment where someone chooses to do the right thing instead of the easy thing. Magistrate Corvus cleared her throat. Your Majesty, we need to discuss next steps. The press will have this story by morning. We need to control the narrative. Darius didn't let go of Reyna, but he did turn to face the magistrate. What do you suggest? A formal announcement. Tonight, you introduce Reyna as your chosen mate, explain the threat against her, and make it clear that anyone who harms her answers to you personally. We frame this as an attack on the crown, not just on a packless Omega. No, Reyna said. Both of them looked at her. No? Magistrate Corvus repeated. I don't want to be introduced as a victim who needed rescuing. I don't want the first time the kingdom sees me to be as someone who was threatened and had to hide in the palace. Reyna looked up at Darius. You asked me to be your mate, your equal partner. So let me stand beside you as an equal, not as someone you have to protect. What are you suggesting? Darius asked carefully. We do the announcement. But we do it together, as partners. Not you defending me, but both of us presenting a united front. We tell the truth that someone tried to hurt me because they were afraid of what our relationship meant. But we also make it clear that I chose this. I chose you, knowing it would be complicated, knowing there would be people who opposed it. I'm not a helpless Omega who stumbled into the king's protection. I'm a woman who decided to mate an alpha because I love him. Magistrate Corvus studied her for a long moment. You realize this will make you a target for every political faction that opposes the king? I'm already a target, might as well own it. A smile tugged at the magistrate's lips. I see why he chose you. She pulled out her phone. I'll arrange a press conference for tonight. You'll have 2 hours to prepare. After she left, Darius turned Reyna to face him fully. Are you sure about this? Once we make that announcement, there's no going back. Your life will never be private again. I'm sure, but Darius, I need you to promise me something else. What? Promise me you won't let revenge consume you. Victor is caught. The pack is being investigated. That's enough. Don't let anger turn you into someone you'll hate. His jaw tightened. They tried to kill you. I know, and they'll be punished for it. But I need you to be the king who believes in justice, not the alpha who believes in vengeance. Can you do that? It took him a long moment to answer. For you? Yes. Not for me. For yourself. Because I love the man who paints terrible pictures and asks about my day and wants to be better than his worst instincts. I need that man, not the one who's so busy protecting me that he forgets who he is. Darius pressed his forehead against hers. How are you this wise? I'm not wise. I'm just tired of letting fear and anger make my decisions. I want to choose love instead, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. I love you, he said. So much it terrifies me. Good. Terror means you're paying attention. She kissed him softly. Now let's go tell the kingdom that their king fell in love with a packless Omega widow, and anyone who has a problem with it can file their complaints in writing. The press conference was held in the palace's formal announcement hall, a room designed to intimidate, with soaring ceilings and the kind of architectural grandeur meant to remind people of the crown's power. Reyna stood backstage, wearing a dress that palace staff had somehow procured in 2 hours deep blue silk that made her feel like she was playing dress-up. Lila was with a trusted palace nanny in a secure room, and Reyna tried not to think about how strange it was to trust strangers with her daughter. Ready? Darius asked, taking her hand. Not even a little bit. Let's do this anyway. They walked out together, and the flash of cameras was blinding. Darius stepped up to the podium first, Reyna beside him, and waited for the room to quiet. Tonight, I'm here to make 2 announcements. He began, his voice carrying easily through the room. First, I want to inform the public that earlier today, we arrested an individual who was planning a violent attack on a private citizen. This person believed he was acting to protect certain interests, but in reality, he was committing a serious crime. He is currently in custody and will face the full extent of our justice system. Murmurs rippled through the crowd of reporters. Second, Darius continued, and his hand tightened around Reyna's. I want to introduce you to Reyna Garrick. She is my chosen mate. The attack I mentioned was directed at her, by people who believed our relationship was a threat to their power. They were wrong. He turned slightly, including Reyna more fully in his address. Reyna is a widow. who has survived impossible circumstances with grace and strength. She's a mother who has fought every day to give her daughter a better life. And she's the woman I love. I don't expect everyone to approve of my choice. I don't need your approval. But I do expect you to treat her with the respect due to the future Queen of Valderan. Any attacks on her verbal, physical, or political will be treated as attacks on the crown itself. He stepped back slightly, giving Rhaena space to speak if she wanted. She hadn't prepared remarks, hadn't practiced, but she stepped up to the microphone anyway, looking out at the sea of faces and cameras, and spoke from the heart. I know what some of you are thinking, that I'm a packless Omega who somehow trapped the king, that I'm using my daughter to secure a position I don't deserve, that I'm not educated enough, connected enough, or worthy enough to stand beside Darius. She paused. You're entitled to those opinions. But here's the truth. I'm not here because I need the king to save me. I'm here because I chose to love him, knowing exactly what that choice would cost. I chose it anyway. Her voice strengthened. I've spent the last 6 months learning what it means to survive when the world tells you you're worthless. When systems meant to help you instead abandon you. When people who should protect you choose politics over compassion. I know what it's like to be invisible, to be treated as disposable, and if becoming queen gives me a platform to change those systems, to make sure no other Omega widow has to beg for help to feed her baby, then I'll use it. That's why I'm here. Not for status or wealth or power, but to make Valderan a place where people like me don't have to be extraordinary just to survive. The room was utterly silent. So yes, Rhaena continued, I'm mating the king. And yes, I'm going to be your queen. And I'm going to work every day to be worthy of that title. Not by being perfect, but by remembering where I came from and using my position to help people the crown has forgotten. If that's not good enough for you, I'm sorry. But I'm done apologizing for surviving. She stepped back, and the room erupted with questions, cameras flashing, reporters shouting to be heard. Darius took her hand and led her off the stage, ignoring the chaos behind them. Once they were backstage, he pulled her into his arms. That was incredible. Was it too much? Did I overstep? It was perfect. You were perfect. He kissed her forehead. Though you realize you just committed yourself to actual political reform? They'll hold you to that. Good. Hold me to it. I meant every word. Magistrate Corvus appeared, looking more animated than Rhaena had ever seen her. The phones are already ringing, half outraged, half inspired. You've definitely made an impression. Is that good or bad? Rhaena asked. It's real, and real is always better than polished lies. The magistrate smiled. Welcome to palace politics, future queen. Try not to let it destroy you. After she left, Rhaena and Darius made their way back to the secure wing where Lila was waiting. What happens now? Rhaena asked as they walked through the quiet corridors. Now? Now we start planning a mating ceremony. Moving your things to the palace. Figuring out how to merge your life with mine. The boring, complicated, wonderful logistics of building a life together. And Victor? The pack? Justice, not vengeance. I promised you that. He squeezed her hand. Though I can't promise I won't enjoy watching them face consequences for what they tried to do. That's fair. They reached the secure wing, where Lila was sleeping peacefully in the nanny's arms. Rhaena took her daughter, held her close, and felt the weight of everything that had happened crash over her. 6 months ago, she'd been texting a wrong number at 2:47 a.m., desperate and alone and certain she was going to lose everything. Now she was standing in a palace, holding her healthy daughter, beside the man she loved, having just announced to an entire kingdom that she wasn't going to apologize for surviving. Darius, she said softly. Yeah? Thank you for answering that text. He wrapped his arms around both of them. Best wrong number I ever got. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Rhaena let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, happy endings weren't just for other people. Maybe they were for survivors too. Epilogue. 6 months later, the mating ceremony had been beautiful and chaotic, and exactly what Rhaena should have expected when trying to combine royal protocol with her insistence on keeping things real. They'd compromised. A formal palace ceremony for the political necessities, followed by a smaller, Private gathering in Riverwalk Park, the place where she'd finally said yes, with the people who actually mattered. Lila had been there for both, wearing a tiny dress covered in stars and stealing the show by laughing through the entire formal ceremony like it was the best entertainment she'd ever witnessed. The press had covered it obsessively. Some outlets praised Darius for choosing love over politics. Others called Raina everything from a social climber to a revolutionary, depending on their agenda. She'd learned to ignore most of it, though Darius still got tense whenever a particularly vicious editorial came out. They'll find something new to be outraged about eventually. Magistrate Corvus had told her during one of their weekly meetings. Because yes, Raina now had weekly meetings with the Royal Council about her social reform initiatives. It was surreal and exhausting and surprisingly fulfilling. She'd kept her promises from the press conference. With Magistrate Corvus's surprising support and Darius's political backing, she'd pushed through reforms to the Omega welfare system, faster approval for emergency assistance, better oversight of housing evaluations, and a fund specifically for widowed Omegas with children. It was a start. Just a start. But it was something. Victor Strand had been sentenced to 15 years in prison for conspiracy to commit murder. Derek's pack had been heavily fined and placed under probation. Thomas Garrick had been ordered to stay at least 500 miles away from Raina and Lila at all times. Justice, not vengeance. Though Raina wouldn't lie, watching Victor's sentencing had felt pretty satisfying. Now, 6 months after the mating ceremony, Raina stood in what she still thought of as her rooms in the palace. Though Darius kept insisting they were our rooms, and stared at the small piece of plastic in her hand. 2 pink lines. Pregnant. She'd suspected for a week, but had been too afraid to test, too afraid to hope. Her doctor had said the stress and malnutrition from before might have affected her fertility, that Lila might be her only biological child. She'd made peace with that, or thought she had. But apparently, her body had other ideas. Raina? Darius's voice from the bedroom. Did Lila's test results come back? The doctor said. He appeared in the bathroom doorway and stopped, seeing her expression. What's wrong? She held up the test, unable to find words. Darius stared at it, then at her, then at it again. Are you? I'm pregnant. The words came out shaky. I know we didn't plan this. I know it's soon. I know we're still figuring out how to balance everything. He crossed the bathroom in 2 strides and picked her up, spinning her around despite her startled yelp. When he set her down, his eyes were bright. We're having a baby? We're having a baby. She searched his face. You're happy? Happy? Raina. He pressed his forehead to hers. I never thought I'd have this. A mate I love. Children. A family. I'd accepted that my life was duty and nothing else. And now you're stuck with me in my chaotic life, and apparently another baby. Best thing that ever happened to me. He kissed her, soft and sweet. All of it. Every chaotic, complicated, perfect piece of it. There was a crash from Lila's room. She was 10 months old now, and had recently discovered the joy of throwing things, followed by the distinctive sound of their daughter's laughter. I should, Raina started, but Darius was already heading toward the noise. She followed, watching as he scooped up Lila, who'd managed to knock over an entire basket of toys and was sitting in the wreckage looking enormously pleased with herself. Troublemaker, he said fondly, and Lila grabbed his nose with sticky fingers, giggling. Raina leaned against the doorframe, watching them, and felt something settle in her chest. This was her life now, this beautiful, impossible, hard-won life. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Her heart jumped, old instincts dying hard. But when she opened it, she had to read it twice to believe it. Miss Garrick, or should I say, Your Majesty. This is Dr. Lissa Kane from the Royal Medical Research Institute. I'm reaching out because we're launching a new study on Omega maternal health, specifically focusing on how stress and nutrition impact fertility. Your story has inspired this research, and we'd love to have you as a consultant. If you're interested, please contact me. We could use someone who understands the real-world implications of our work. Raina read it again, then showed it to Darius. You should do it, he said immediately. You'd be amazing at that. I don't know anything about medical research. You know about surviving impossible circumstances. You know about the gaps in the system. That's exactly what they need. He shifted Lila to one hip. Plus, imagine what you could accomplish if you helped shape research that actually addresses Omega health issues. Real change, Raina. Not just policy reform, but scientific advancement. She thought about it. About the woman she'd been 6 months ago, texting a wrong number in desperation. About all the other women still in that position, still struggling, still invisible to systems that were supposed to help them. I'll call her tomorrow, Raina decided. Good. Darius kissed her temple. For tonight, though, let's celebrate. We can order in from that place you like, watch Lila destroy more of her room, and figure out how to tell Magistrate Corvus that you're pregnant and she needs to adjust the official schedule. She's going to be so annoyed. She'll be thrilled. She's been hinting about heirs for months. They ordered food, real, delicious food that Raina didn't have to worry about affording, and spent the evening on the floor of Lila's room, watching their daughter play with her toys while planning for the future. Boy or girl? Darius asked at one point. Does it matter? Not even a little bit. Though if it's a boy, can we not name him after any previous kings? That tradition is exhausting. Deal. And if it's a girl? Whatever you want. Though maybe avoid names that start with E. Still too hard. Raina squeezed his hand, understanding. Marin would always be a wound, but at least now it was a healing one. Later, after Lila was asleep in her crib, and they were lying in bed together, Darius traced patterns on Raina's still flat stomach. What are you thinking about? She asked. About how different everything is from a year ago. How close I came to never meeting you because you almost didn't send that text. How many tiny decisions had to line up perfectly for us to be here right now. Sliding door moments. What? It's a theory. That our lives are shaped by tiny moments, doors we walk through or don't walk through. If my phone hadn't cracked and scrambled my contacts. If you hadn't answered a call from an unknown number at 4 a.m. If I hadn't been brave enough to open my door when you showed up. Any one of those moments could have gone differently, and we wouldn't be here. That's a terrifying thought, or a beautiful one, because all those moments did happen. We did walk through those doors, and it brought us here. Darius pulled her closer. I prefer the beautiful interpretation. Me too. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, and Raina thought about all the doors she'd walked through, some by choice, some by necessity, some by accident. The door of her father's house, when he'd offered her up. The door of Jakob's pack, when they'd rejected her. The door of her apartment when Darius had first arrived with formula and hope. And the door to this life, scary and complicated, and full of responsibilities she'd never imagined having. She'd walked through it afraid, certain it would end badly, but unwilling to let fear make her decisions anymore. Raina? Darius's voice was drowsy. Yeah? I'm really glad you texted the wrong number. She smiled into the darkness. Me too. 3 months later, the Royal Medical Research Institute announcement was scheduled for 2 p.m., and Raina was nervous in a way she hadn't been since the mating ceremony. She was 4 months pregnant now, just starting to show, wearing a dress that accommodated her changing body while still looking professional. Lila was with her nanny. Raina had made peace with having help, though it still felt strange sometimes. Darius was in meetings all morning but had promised to be there for the announcement. Dr. Lissa Kane met her in the lobby, a sharp-eyed beta woman in her 50s with the kind of intensity that came from dedicating your life to a cause. Ready? She asked. Not even slightly. Perfect. That means you're paying attention to how important this is. Dr. Kane led her through the research facility, pointing out various departments. We've got preliminary approval for 3 major studies, all focused on Omega maternal health. Nutrition's impact on lactation, stress effects on fertility, support system correlations with postpartum outcomes. And thanks to your advocacy and the King's funding, we've got resources we've never had before. They reached a conference room where other researchers waited, a mix of alphas, betas, and omegas, all looking at Raina with expressions ranging from curious to hopeful. Everyone, Dr. Kane announced. This is Raina Kale, our consultant on lived experience and policy implementation. She's going to help ensure our research actually translates into meaningful change for the Omegas who need it most. Raina took a breath and stepped forward. I'm not a scientist. I don't have a medical degree. What I do have is experience with a system that failed me spectacularly. I know what it's like to be invisible to the people who are supposed to help. I know what it's like to make impossible choices, because you don't have good options. And I know what it's like to survive despite everything stacked against you. If my experience can help shape research that prevents other Omegas from going through what I did, then this is exactly where I need to be. The presentation went well. Better than well. By the end of it, 3 researchers had approached her with additional ideas, and Dr. Kane was practically vibrating with excitement about the possibilities. Darius met her afterward, Lila on his hip, looking absurdly domestic for a king. How did it go? He asked. I think I just accidentally committed myself to a 10-year research initiative. Sounds about right. He kissed her. I'm proud of you. I'm just talking about my experience. You're changing systems. You're making sure other people don't fall through the cracks like you did. That's not just anything. They walked through the palace gardens, Raina's favorite place to decompress, while Lila pointed at birds and flowers with delighted squeals. I got a call today, Darius said casually. From Alpha Prime Theron. He rules the Western Territories. The one who's been vocal about thinking I'm unfit to be queen? That's the one. Apparently, his daughter just became a widow. Packless now, with 2 young children. He wanted to know if our welfare reforms extended to his territory, and if so, how to access them. Raina stopped walking. He called you personally? Apparently, his perspective has shifted now that it's his family affected. Darius's tone was dry. Funny how that works. Did you help him? I directed him to the appropriate channels, same ones available to everyone else, no special treatment. He paused, though I may have mentioned that his previous public statements about you were particularly memorable. Darius. What? I'm allowed to be petty occasionally. It's good for the soul. Despite herself, Raina laughed. You're ridiculous. You love me anyway. I really do. That evening, after Lila was in bed and they were settled on the couch in their private sitting room, Raina's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She opened it warily, old habits, but the message made her throat tight. My name is Kira. I'm a widow in the Eastern Territories. I just found out about the emergency welfare reforms you pushed through. Because of those reforms, I got approved for assistance in 3 days instead of 3 months. My son is eating again. I don't know if you'll ever see this, but I wanted you to know. You saved us. Thank you. Raina showed it to Darius silently. He read it, then pulled her closer. See? Changing the world, one policy at a time. It's not enough. One woman, one policy, it's not enough. No, but it's more than there was before. And you'll keep pushing for more. I know you will. She would. She knew she would. Because she'd lived through the system's failures, and she couldn't unknow that. Couldn't pretend everything was fine now, that her own life was stable. What are you thinking about? Darius asked, reading her expression. About doors, she said. About all the doors I walked through to get here. About all the doors still closed to people like Kira, and the thousands of others still struggling. So we open more doors. Just like that? Just like that. He pressed a kiss to her temple. We open doors, we change laws, we push back against systems that crush people. Together. For however long it takes, Raina leaned into him, one hand on her growing belly, and thought about the future. About the baby who would be born into a world slightly better than the one Lila had been born into. About the research that might help prevent other women from losing their milk supply to stress. About the policies that might catch people before they fell through the cracks. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fixed. But it was better. And better was worth fighting for. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from Dr. Kane. Just got approval for a 4th study, examining the long-term impacts of pack rejection on Omega mental health. Could use your input on design. Coffee tomorrow? Raina typed back. Absolutely. 10 a.m.? Perfect. Bring ideas. And maybe that intimidating king of yours. His presence makes approval processes move faster. Raina laughed and showed Darius, who rolled his eyes. I'm not intimidating. I'm just assertive. You're terrifying when you want to be. Only to people who deserve it. Later, much later, when they were getting ready for bed, and the palace had settled into its nighttime quiet, Darius caught Rhaina's hand. "What?" she asked. "Nothing. Just, I want to remember this. Right now. You pregnant with our baby. Lila sleeping down the hall. Your research starting. The reforms working. I want to remember this moment of everything being okay. In case it stops being okay. In case I forget that good things can happen. That sometimes the universe gets it right." Rhaina kissed him, soft and lingering. The universe got it right. A wrong number that turned into everything. "Best mistake you ever made." "Not a mistake," she corrected. "A door. I walked through a door when I sent that text. And it led me here. To me. To us. To this whole complicated, beautiful, impossible life." She smiled. "Worth every terrifying step." They climbed into bed, and Rhaina fell asleep thinking about doors and choices, and the strange paths that led to happiness. About a text sent to the wrong number at 2:47 a.m. that had changed everything. About a king who'd answered. About a woman who'd been brave enough to walk through the door when he opened it. And about all the other doors still waiting to be opened, for all the other women still fighting in the dark, hoping someone would answer their calls for help. She'd answer them. However long it took, whatever it cost, she'd answer them. Because she remembered what it was like to be invisible. And she'd spend the rest of her life making sure no one else had to feel that way again.